I don't talk about this often. Most people wouldn't believe it anyway. And honestly, sometimes I wish I didn't remember it myself. But when that bell rings at midnight, even now, years later, I still wake up in a cold sweat, holding my breath, waiting for something that never quite comes, but never really leaves either. My name is Jacob Mercer. I'm 34 now, but back then I was just 22, fresh out of college, working odd jobs to stay afloat. I'd gone to school for historical preservation, which basically meant I spent a lot of time around old buildings, graveyards, and things people usually avoided. Not because they were scary, but because they were forgotten. That was how I found Krausfield. Or rather, how it found me. Krausfield Cemetery was listed in an old registry I found in a dusty back room at the Township Records office. It wasn't even supposed to exist anymore. The property had supposedly been condemned in the 1930s, but when I visited the area out of curiosity, there it was hidden behind a collapsed iron gate and thick clusters of dying oak. No path, no welcome, just silence. And something about that silence made me want to know more. The thing is, I wasn't really supposed to be there. The whole area had been bought out by a developer, some big shot who planned to turn the surrounding land into vacation cabins. But the cemetery? Nobody wanted to touch it. Too much legal red tape. No one claimed ownership. So it just sat there, rotting like a sore spot in the woods nobody wanted to treat. Which made it the perfect place for me to explore without raising eyebrows. The first time I stepped inside, I remember thinking the ground felt soft, not muddy, not wet, just soft, like it wasn't settled. I brushed it off. Years of decay, tree roots, animal dens. I'm not a superstitious guy, but even then, something about Krausfield didn't sit right. It was too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're being watched, but when you turn around, nothing's there. Not even birds. Not even wind. Looking back though, I should have listened to that feeling. I should have walked away the moment I saw the bell tower. Yeah, there was a bell tower. Tiny, stone, maybe 10 feet tall. Completely overgrown with moss and ivy. No rope, no sign of use, but the bell, still there. Rusted, hung crooked, like it had been yanked one too many times from one direction. It shouldn't have stood at all, honestly. I remember thinking it looked more like a gravestone than a tower. Something someone built not to ring, but to remember. I snapped a few pictures, jotted some notes. That was my plan: write a short blog post, maybe pitch an article to the local paper about forgotten landmarks. Nothing crazy. But then, right as I was leaving, I saw it, an unmarked stone, no carving, no date, just a slab of granite, tilted forward like the ground had been shifting underneath it. I bent down to check it out, and that's when I noticed something else. My keys were gone. I know. People lose keys all the time. I figured they must have fallen out of my pocket while I was climbing over the gate. But something about it felt off. I'd used a carabiner to clip them to my belt loop. That thing was stiff as hell. No way they just fell off. I searched for almost an hour, retraced every step, even crawled around in the mud by the bell tower. Nothing. I had to call a friend to come pick me up. I felt like an idiot. He laughed it off, of course. "You sure that bell didn't summon a key-snatching ghost?" He joked. I laughed too, but it felt forced. The silence had followed me. Even on the ride back, I couldn't shake it. I had the window cracked and kept expecting to hear the bell ring behind me. But of course it didn't. Not yet. I told myself it was just nerves. The whole place had a vibe, sure, but so do a lot of forgotten places. That's half the charm, right? I didn't go back for a week. But the thing about curiosity, it doesn't let go. Not when it's got claws like that, so I returned. And this time, I brought my camera gear, a journal, and a new set of keys. I told myself I'd be in and out, just a few hours. But I ended up staying until dusk. I couldn't help it. There were carvings on some of the stones I hadn't seen the first time, symbols, almost like initials, but not quite. I started sketching them. I found 3 more unmarked graves like the first one. Same stone, same tilt, same patch of soft earth in front of them. It wasn't until the sun had fully set that I realized I'd overstayed. I packed up and started toward the gate, which was now little more than bent iron rods sticking up like teeth. That's when I heard it, the bell, just once, clear, loud, a single ring. It echoed through the trees like someone had struck a tuning fork in the dirt. I froze. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight up. I turned slowly. The bell tower was maybe 30 yards away, half hidden behind brambles. No movement, no breeze, no animals. Nothing. I stood there for what felt like forever. Then I bolted. I didn't even stop when I cut my leg on the gate. I just kept running until I reached the dirt road where I'd parked. I drove straight home without even bandaging the wound. The whole ride, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, like something had followed me. But again, nothing. I'll skip the boring stuff. A few days passed. I tried to forget. I even tried to convince myself the bell had been a bird or an old branch snapping in just the right way. But then it happened again. This time, at home. I live in a small second-floor apartment above a bookstore. Old building, lots of creaks and groans. But that night, at exactly midnight, I woke up to a sound I couldn't place at first. A faint echo, then clear as anything a bell, one single chime. Like someone ringing for dinner in the next room. I sat up so fast I knocked over a glass of water. I checked the hallway. My phone. Nothing. No notifications. No calls. Just that ringing stuck in my ears. That's when it hit me. It was the same tone, same pitch, same broken echo that I'd heard at Krausfield. But how the hell could that be? I started checking things. Internet forums, ghost stories, local records. I found almost nothing about the cemetery, no records past 1934. No family names connected to it. The land wasn't even listed under a county plot. It was like someone had erased it from the map. But that bell? I found one reference. A single line in a 1929 town ledger. Repaired west-facing bell, reported to ring without wind. Complaint from caretaker regarding nightly noise. No cause found. West-facing. That meant it pointed toward town, which was exactly the direction I lived. Now, it couldn't be a coincidence. Could it? The next night, I didn't sleep. I waited. Midnight came, and there it was. One chime. Then nothing. But this time, I noticed something else. My front door? Unlocked. I always triple check it before bed. Always, but the bolt was fully turned. And sitting just inside the door, on the floor, were my old keys. The ones I'd lost at Krausfield. I didn't touch them. I just stared. My breath fogged up the glass door as I stood there, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then, from the hallway behind me, footsteps. Just one. Like someone taking a slow, dragging step across the wood floor, I turned. No one there. But the air was cold, freezing, and something smelled like wet dirt. I should have left town that night. I know that now. But I didn't. I had to know. What was happening? I had to go back. And when I did, everything I thought I understood about that place and about myself came undone. The next morning, I did something stupid. I brought the old keys back with me. I picked them up with a towel, stuffed them in a Ziploc bag like some kind of forensic nerd, and took them straight to Krausfield. I don't know what I thought. I was going to prove. Maybe deep down, I wanted to give them back. As if the place had claimed them, and I was trying to put them where they belonged again. Either way, I went back through the broken gate, walked the same narrow trail, and stood in front of the bell tower like I was meeting someone for a second date. It was strange how quickly the place started to feel ... familiar. The bell tower still leaned like it could collapse any second, and the air still carried that dry, dusty coldness that clung to your clothes long after you left. But it didn't scare me anymore. In fact, there was something almost peaceful about it. The overgrown graves, the quiet, the lack of traffic or people or phones buzzing. Out there, I felt separate, like I'd stepped into another version of time where things waited instead of moved. Looking back though, that's what Krausfield wanted. It lulled me into thinking I was in control, that I could come and go freely. It gave me just enough room to think I was the one watching it, when really, I was the one being watched. But back then, I didn't see it. I set up my tripod, took better photos of the strange symbols on the graves, and even started sketching the layout of the cemetery. I remember thinking I could make a full map and send it to the local historical society, like I was doing a good deed. A service. I even brought a folding chair and a thermos of coffee one afternoon. Sat near the bell tower and wrote notes like some kind of field scientist. I told myself this was my project, my discovery. And yeah, maybe I liked that it was mine alone, that nobody else cared enough to find it. My friends thought I was weird for being so into cemeteries anyway. They shrugged it off like it was just another one of my quirky interests. So I stopped telling them about it altogether. The fewer questions, the better. I'll skip the boring stuff, hours spent scribbling dates into my notebook, checking the sun's angle through the trees, trying to trace family lines based on the fragments of names still readable on the older stones. It was quiet work, repetitive, but it settled me. I was still waking up at midnight to the sound of the bell though. That part didn't stop. Sometimes I'd dream I was walking through Krausfield with a lantern and could hear the bell somewhere, far off, hidden in fog. I'd wake up feeling like I hadn't really been sleeping at all. I started spending longer and longer at the cemetery. I brought snacks, extra batteries, even a portable power bank to charge my phone while I worked. I set up a small camp chair under one of the old oaks. There was something comforting about the way the wind moved through the branches, even if the birds never sang. I started telling myself the bell tower wasn't evil, it was just forgotten. And maybe that's why it reached out. Not to scare, but to remind someone it was still there. I recorded the sound of the bell one afternoon. Not the ringing. I never heard it during the day, but the silence around it. The kind of silence that seems too complete, like the air's holding its breath. I'd play it back later at night and swear I could hear something underneath. A faint humming, a low crackling buzz. It was never the same twice. I even showed the audio to a friend of mine who does sound design for film. He told me it was probably some kind of electrical interference or wind distortion. I didn't argue, but I knew he was wrong. After a few weeks, Krausfield didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt hollow, sure, but not dangerous. Like an empty house waiting for someone to notice the wallpaper. I started brushing leaves off headstones, clearing small patches of overgrowth. At one point, I even bought a pack of biodegradable candles and lit a few around the tower at sunset. It was stupid, I know, but it felt respectful, like I was acknowledging something or someone that had been left behind for too long. People stopped hearing from me as often. I missed a couple calls from my mom, ignored texts from coworkers. The outside world felt more like noise than anything real. I even forgot to pay a parking ticket. Not like me at all. But the deeper I got into Krausfield, the more I started thinking maybe I belonged there. Not in a dig my own grave way, but in that weird spiritual sense. Like the place was letting me in, one slow breath at a time. The midnight bell still came like clockwork. One chime, never more. Always at exactly 12 o'clock. I checked the time every night just to confirm it wasn't in my head. Eventually, I stopped being scared of it. Sometimes I even smiled when I heard it, like it was some kind of sign, a reminder. And that's what scared me later, realizing I'd started to miss the sound when it didn't come one night. I actually sat up in bed at 12:01, waiting. But nothing happened. No bell. No echo. Just the regular creaking of the ceiling fan and the hum of the fridge downstairs. And then something new happened. I woke up around 3 in the morning and saw muddy footprints on my hardwood floor. Just 2 bare feet, wet, with bits of leaves stuck to the heels. They led from the front door to the center of my living room and stopped. No trail in, no trail out. I didn't even remember hearing the door open. I just stood there in the doorway, staring at them for a long time. Then I did something even more stupid. I took a photo. I wanted proof. But when I checked my phone, the picture was just ... blank. No footprints. Just the floor. That should have been the turning point. That should have been the moment I packed a bag and left town. But I didn't. I cleaned the prints off the floor and went back to bed. Told myself it was a dream, that maybe I'd spilled something and sleepwalked. I even threw the towel I'd used on the floor into the laundry and didn't think about it again, not for a few more days. Not until I found the same footprints at Krausfield. This time they were in the dirt, leading around the back of the bell tower. Same bare feet, same odd spacing, and they weren't mine. I was wearing boots, heavy ones. These were lighter, narrower, and the toes pointed toward the woods, not away from them. like someone had walked out from beneath the tower and vanished into the trees. But even then, I wasn't scared. Not really. Just curious. I followed the tracks for maybe 30 feet before they disappeared beneath a patch of overgrowth. I remember crouching down, brushing the leaves aside, and feeling the same soft ground I'd noticed on my first visit. Loose dirt, as if something had been dug up and covered again, but not well. Not deep, like a shallow grave with secrets too heavy to bury for good. Still, I didn't run. I didn't call the cops. I didn't even tell anyone. That's how far gone I was. I thought this was all part of the mystery, that maybe I was close to solving something big, something historic. Maybe the town had covered up a death, a string of burials no one wanted to talk about. Or maybe the bell wasn't a warning, but a call, a way to remember the forgotten. That's what I told myself, anyway. The truth was, I'd already been marked by the place. I just didn't know it yet. And soon, the cracks would start showing, in me, in Krausfield, in the line between the living and the dead. And once those cracks opened, there'd be no way to close them. It started small, so small I convinced myself it was coincidence. The first thing that went missing was my notebook. Not one of the cheap ones either. It was my hardbound black moleskin, the one I'd filled with hand-drawn maps, gravestone rubbings, and notes from the cemetery. I always kept it in the drawer, by my desk, always. But one morning, I opened the drawer and it was just gone. No mess, no break-in, no signs of forced entry. Everything else was still there. Chargers, receipts, even a loose 20. But not the notebook. It didn't make sense. I tore the place apart looking for it, even dug through the trash, thinking maybe I'd misplaced it during one of my late-night scribble sessions. Nothing. It was just gone. I tried not to panic, but a voice in the back of my head whispered something I wasn't ready to hear. Maybe I hadn't brought it home at all. Maybe I'd left it out there, at Krausfield, during one of my long afternoons under the oak trees. But that didn't make sense either. I always packed my bag before leaving. I had a rhythm to it: camera, thermos, notebook, then keys. And the keys were always last, so I'd have to see the notebook on top. Still, I decided to go back and check. I didn't even hesitate. That should have been a warning sign in itself. How? Quickly, I felt the pull to return there, as if the place were waiting for me to come back and reclaim something it had never given me permission to take. When I arrived, everything looked the same, but somehow wrong. The trees were thicker, or maybe just darker. The shadows pooled in places they hadn't before. And there was this smell like wet copper and old leaves left too long in water. I walked straight to my usual spot near the bell tower. Searching the ground, the base of the trees, the little clearing I'd used to write, nothing. No notebook, no torn pages, no trace that I'd ever been there at all. Even the candles I'd placed a week earlier were gone. I checked the dirt where I'd left the folding chair, and the impression was still there. But the chair itself? Missing. Looking back, though, it wasn't about the notebook or the chair. It was about what it meant that the place was aware of me, not just passively accepting my presence, but actively deciding what I could and couldn't take with me. That thought hit me like a punch to the chest. I remember standing there, the late afternoon sun slanting through the trees, and feeling The sudden weight of being watched. I turned around so fast I nearly tripped over a tree root. But there was nothing. Just that endless heavy silence that somehow rang louder than sound ever could. When I got home that night, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even try to talk myself down. I just sat on my couch with all the lights on and waited for midnight. I didn't have to wait long. At exactly 12 o'clock, the bell rang clear, sharp, and much closer than it had ever sounded before. Not echoing through the trees, not distant like it had been in previous nights. It felt like it was inside my walls, reverberating through the floorboards. I stood up, heart pounding, and saw my apartment door slowly drifting open. Just a crack, but enough. I grabbed a baseball bat and crept to the door, flicked on the hallway light. No one was there. No muddy footprints this time. No cold breeze, but the fear? That was back in full force. The next day, I decided to talk to someone. Local. I figured maybe one of the older residents knew about Krausfield. It was technically outside town limits, but only by a few miles. I stopped into an antique store near the square, one of those cluttered places run by a woman who looked like she'd lived through 3 wars and remembered them all vividly. Her name was Edna. I mentioned the cemetery casually, pretending I was doing a photo project. The moment I said Krausfield, she stopped wiping the glass case and looked up at me with a face that said I'd said something I shouldn't have. She didn't give me much. Just a cold stare and a half-muttered, "That place should have stayed covered." I asked what she meant, and she shook her head. "Things buried don't always want to stay that way," she said, then turned her back on me. I left the store, with my stomach in knots, unsure whether I was more unnerved by what she'd said or the way she'd said it, like it wasn't superstition, like it was memory. Later that night, I found my notebook on the kitchen table, just sitting there like it had never been gone, but the pages were wrong. They were wet-soaked through and then dried in a crinkled mess. Some were torn. Others were burned at the edges. One page, near the center, had deep gouge marks as if something sharp had dug into it over and over. And someone, definitely not me, had written in red ink on the back page, "You don't listen." I dropped the notebook and stumbled back, knocking over my chair. My first instinct was to run, but to where? I was already home, and the worst part? I still heard the bell at midnight, every night, like clockwork. I went back to Edna's store the next day. I needed answers. I needed her to explain what she'd meant. But the place was closed. A handwritten sign taped to the door read, "Closed for family emergency." No forwarding number, no explanation. I asked the florist next door if Edna was okay. She just gave me a strange look and said I didn't even know she had any family. I left with more questions than I came with, and that night the bell rang louder than ever. This time the windows shook. I swear one of the panes cracked, a little at the corner. I tried recording it again, using 2 different apps, but when I played it back, there was nothing. No chime, just silence, and underneath that silence, a whisper I couldn't quite make out. Things escalated after that. My photos started disappearing off my phone, whole folders gone. I backed them up to my computer, but one morning I woke up to Find every image I'd taken of the bell tower replaced with a black square. No error message, no corruption warning. Just black. Like something had reached through the screen and smothered the light out of them. My email started glitching. My lights flickered. And twice, I came home to find the bell chime hanging in the air as if it had just rung a second before I opened the door. One night, I saw someone outside my window. Not clearly, just a shape, tall, still, watching. I live on the second floor, and there's no balcony, no fire escape, just brick wall. I stared at the shadow until my eyes watered, then blinked, and it was gone. I didn't sleep that night, didn't even pretend to. I just sat in the living room with every light on and the volume turned down low on a white noise machine I'd bought that day. But even over the white noise, I could hear it, the faint echo of a bell that shouldn't be there. I finally tried calling the township office. Not to report a haunting, obviously I'm not completely crazy. I just asked for old cemetery. Records. I used the historical angle, said I was writing a paper. The clerk I spoke to was polite but confused. She told me they didn't have anything by that name. I asked her to check alternate spellings. She said she would and put me on hold. When she came back, her voice had changed, a little colder. She said, "Sir, there's no record of a cemetery matching that name or location. Maybe it was decommissioned." I pushed back, mentioned the 1929 ledger. She paused and then asked, "Where did you say you were calling from again?" Her tone was strange, cautious. I gave her my name and number, but she just said someone would get back to me. They never did. By that point, I started locking my bedroom door at night. Not because I thought it would keep anything out, but because it made me feel better. Like I had some line of defense. I started sleeping with the lights on, earbuds in, white noise cranked to max. And still, I'd wake up at midnight every single night. Bell. One chime. Always the same. Sometimes the bell would seem far away. Sometimes it was so close I swore it rang from beneath my floorboards. And once, just once, I heard something after the chime. A dragging sound, slow, measured, as if something were moving across the wood. Coming closer, at some point, my apartment stopped feeling like mine. I don't mean that metaphorically, it literally began to change. Small details at first, ones most people wouldn't even notice. My kitchen light flickered constantly, but only when I was in the room. The thermostat reset itself to exactly 66 degrees every night, no matter how many times I adjusted it. Once, I came home to find every cabinet and drawer in my kitchen wide open, nothing missing, just exposed. As if someone or something wanted me to see what had been touched. I tried chalking it up to stress, maybe sleepwalking, but the sheer consistency made that hard to believe. It felt deliberate, targeted, like I was part of some quiet ritual I hadn't agreed to participate in. I started keeping a journal on my phone, just in case my paper notes vanished again. Every night at midnight, like clockwork, the bell would ring just once, but now there was often something after. A distant rustle, a shuffle. One night, I swear I heard breathing. I held my own breath to be sure, and still, it came ragged and low, like someone lying just beneath the floorboards, sucking air through clenched teeth. The worst part? My cat, Max, started to react too. He'd sit at the bedroom door, tail puffed up, ears flat, staring at nothing. One time, he bolted from the room the second the bell rang and wouldn't come back in for hours. He started sleeping under the bed instead of beside me, and when I tried to coax him out, he hissed at the empty hallway. Not at me, at something I couldn't see. I should have stopped going to Krausfield. Every logical part of me knew that, but I didn't. I kept returning like an addict chasing a high that had turned sour, but still offered the illusion of control. And every time I went back, the cemetery looked less like a ruin and more like a trap. The gravestones were shifting. I'm not imagining that. One had moved 4 feet from its original spot, half buried again but now closer to the bell tower. I checked my old photos to be sure, and the placement didn't match. Another time, I noticed a fresh patch of dirt, new, turned, like someone had dug recently, but there were no tools, no markers. Just a mound of earth, too clean to be accidental. One afternoon, I caught a glimpse of something near the far tree line. A figure, just standing. I couldn't make out the details, too much shadow, but it was tall, still, and watching. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it was a deer. Or maybe another visitor. But let's be honest, who visits an unlisted cemetery in the middle of nowhere with no road signs and no paths? That night, the bell rang at 11:59 instead of 12 o'clock, and it made my blood run cold. It was like a clock had slipped, like whatever was watching me had changed the schedule, just to let me know it could. Looking back though, I realize I wasn't just being observed. I was being studied. Each visit to Krausfield was met with deeper shifts. One day, my camera refused to take pictures within the cemetery's boundaries. It would function fine on the trail, but as soon as I stepped between the trees that marked its edge, the shutter would freeze. The screen would go black. The moment I backed out, it worked again. I switched to a disposable film camera. Same thing. The rolls came back completely blank, overexposed to pure white. I'd never seen anything like it. It was as if the place wasn't just rejecting documentation, it was erasing it. I went back to Edna's store the next day. I needed answers. I needed her to explain what she'd meant. But the place was closed. A handwritten sign taped to the door read, "Closed for family emergency." No forwarding number. No explanation. I asked the florist next door if Edna was okay. She just gave me a strange look and said, I didn't even know she had any family. I left with more questions than I came with, and that night, the bell rang louder than ever. This time, the window shook. I swear one of the panes cracked. A little at the corner. I tried recording it again, using 2 different apps, but when I played it back, there was nothing. No chime. Just silence, and underneath that silence, a whisper I couldn't quite make out. Things escalated after that. My photos started disappearing off my phone. Whole folders gone. I backed them up to my computer, but one morning, I woke up to find every image I'd taken of the bell tower replaced with a black square. No error message, no corruption warning. Just black. Like something had reached through the screen and smothered the light out of them. My email started glitching. My lights flickered. And twice, I came home to find the bell chime hanging in the air as if it had just rung a second before I opened the door. One night, I saw someone outside my window. Not clearly, just a shape. Tall, still, watching. I live on the second floor, and there's no balcony, no fire escape, just brick wall. I stared at the shadow until my eyes watered, then blinked, and it was gone. I didn't sleep that night, didn't even pretend to. I just sat in the living room with every light on and the volume turned down low on a white noise machine I'd bought that day. But even over the white noise I could hear it, the faint echo of a bell that shouldn't be there. I finally tried calling the township office. Not to report a haunting. Obviously, I'm not completely crazy. I just asked for old cemetery records. I used the historical angle, said I was writing a paper. The clerk I spoke to was polite but confused. She told me they didn't have anything by that name. I asked her to check alternate spellings. She said she would and put me on hold. When she came back, her voice had changed, a little colder. She said, "Sir, there's no record of a cemetery matching that name or location. Maybe it was decommissioned." I pushed back, mentioned the 1929 ledger. She paused and then asked, "Where did you say you were calling from again?" Her tone was strange, cautious. I gave her my name and number, but she just said someone would get back to me. They never did. By that point, I started locking my bedroom door at night. Not because I thought it would keep anything out, but because it made me feel better. Like I had some line of defense. I started sleeping with the lights on, earbuds in, white noise cranked to max. And still I'd wake up at midnight every single night. Bell, one chime. Always the same. Sometimes the bell would seem far away. Sometimes it was so close I swore it rang from beneath my floorboards. And once, just once, I heard something after the chime. A dragging sound, slow, measured, as if something were moving across the wood. Coming closer. At some point, my apartment stopped feeling like mine. I don't mean that metaphorically, it literally began to change. Small details at first, ones most people wouldn't even notice. My kitchen light flickered constantly, but only when I was in the room. The thermostat reset itself to exactly 66 degrees every night, no matter how many times I adjusted it. Once, I came home to find every cabinet and drawer in my kitchen wide open, nothing missing, just exposed. As if someone or something wanted me to see what had been touched. I tried chalking it up to stress, maybe sleepwalking, but the sheer consistency made that hard to believe. It felt deliberate, targeted, like I was part of some quiet ritual I hadn't agreed to participate in. I started keeping a journal on my phone, just in case my paper notes vanished again. Every night at midnight, like clockwork, the bell would ring just once, but now there was often something after. A distant rustle, a shuffle. One night, I swear I heard breathing. I held my own breath to be sure, and still, it came ragged and low, like someone lying just beneath the floorboards, sucking air through clenched teeth. The worst part? My cat, Max, started to react too. He'd sit at the bedroom door, tail puffed up, ears flat, staring at nothing. One time, he bolted from the room the second the bell rang and wouldn't come back in for hours. He started sleeping under the bed instead of beside me, and when I tried to coax him out, he hissed at the empty hallway. Not at me, at something I couldn't see. I should have stopped going to Krausfield. Every logical part of me knew that, but I didn't. I kept returning like an addict chasing a high that had turned sour but still offered the illusion of control. And every time I went back, the cemetery looked less like a ruin and more like a trap. The gravestones were shifting. I'm not imagining that. One had moved 4 feet from its original spot, half buried again, but now closer to the bell tower. I checked my old photos to be sure, and the placement didn't match. Another time, I noticed a fresh patch of dirt, new, turned, like someone had dug recently, but there were no tools, no markers, just a mound of earth too clean to be accidental. One afternoon, I caught a glimpse of something near the far tree line. A figure, just standing. I couldn't make out the details, too much shadow, but it was tall, still, and watching. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it was a deer, or maybe another visitor. But let's be honest, who visits an unlisted cemetery in the middle of nowhere with no road signs and no paths? That night, the bell rang at 11:59 instead of 12 o'clock, and it made my blood run cold. It was like a clock had slipped, like whatever was watching me had changed the schedule just to let me know it could. Looking back though, I realized I wasn't just being observed. I was being studied. Each visit to Krausfield was met with deeper shifts. One day, my camera refused to take pictures within the cemetery's boundaries. It would function fine on the trail, but as soon as I stepped between the trees that marked its edge, the shutter would freeze. The screen would go black. The moment I backed out, it worked again. I switched to a disposable film camera. Same thing. The rolls came back completely blank, overexposed to pure white. I'd never seen anything like it. It was as if the place wasn't just rejecting documentation, it was erasing it. Looking back though, I can't say I was surprised. I think part of me had known all along that this was more than just a haunting. Krausfield wasn't just a place, it was a process, a pattern, something that repeated over and over. It didn't just remember the dead. It created them, pulled people in, made them part of its story, then buried them in silence. And I was next. I'd crossed a line I hadn't even seen. I wasn't just studying the cemetery anymore, I was becoming part of it. And there was no clear way out. I fled the tunnel, didn't even bother closing the hatch behind me. My legs barely worked as I climbed the hill back toward the gate. The wind picked up, carrying a sound I'll never forget, not the bell, but something beneath it. A scream, stretched out and broken into pieces, like a recording played in reverse. It echoed through the trees, and I didn't stop running until I reached my car. But when I turned the key, nothing happened. Not even a click. The battery, brand new just last month, was completely dead. I sat there for a moment, hands trembling, breath fogging up the windshield, and knew I had to call someone. Anyone. I opened my phone, and every single contact was gone. Just blank. The call log, the text history, the photos. Everything erased. Only one message remained. No number, no name. Just a gray bubble that read, "Return what you took." I didn't know what it meant. I hadn't taken anything. Not intentionally, but the message chilled me all the same. I waited until a couple of hikers passed by before flagging them down for help. I lied, told them I was out for nature photography. and locked my keys in the car. They offered me a ride back to town, but I made them drop me 2 blocks from my apartment. I didn't want anyone knowing where I lived, not anymore. When I got inside, I went straight to the kitchen and dumped my backpack. That's when I saw it. At the very bottom, beneath my camera and flashlight, was a small brass bell. I didn't put it there. I swear I didn't. But there it was, rusted, cracked, heavy for its size. The sound it made when I turned it over was low and hollow, like something broken was still trying to ring from inside. My hand started shaking so hard I dropped it on the tile, and the moment it hit the floor, the power went out. Every light, every hum, gone. I stood in the dark for what felt like an hour, gripping the counter and trying not to panic. When the lights came back on, the bell was gone. Just gone. I checked the entire apartment, even the trash, even under the couch. Nothing. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. My eyes kept drifting toward the corners of the room, half expecting to see someone standing there. Not a ghost, not a monster, but me. The version of myself that had stared up from the bottom of the grave in my dream. The one that had already been claimed by this thing, this place. I started to wonder if the cemetery had always been there, or if it had followed me, built itself into the gaps of my memory until I couldn't remember a time before it. I began digging into local obituaries, not recent ones older. I pulled records from the public archives, started searching for patterns, and I found one. Every 30 years, there was a spike in disappearances tied to the forest around Krausfield. Most never mentioned the cemetery, but a few hinted at it. Last seen hiking near the old trail. Known to explore abandoned properties. Car found near undeveloped woodlands. And every time, 7 people were taken. Not 6, not 8, 7. I listed the names. All men. All between the ages of 20 and 40. And when I added them up, including my own initials from the tunnel wall, I got the same answer. I wasn't the first. I was just the latest in a long, quiet line. The betrayal wasn't that the place was haunted. It was that no one had ever tried to stop it. Not the locals. Not the township. Not even the few who had survived long enough to leave warnings. They let it continue. They knew it couldn't be destroyed, only fed. And maybe that's why Edna had closed her shop so suddenly. She knew I'd been marked. She didn't want to get caught in the fallout. And maybe, I hate to even say this, but maybe she'd been part of it once too. Maybe everyone who lived near Krausfield knew the price of silence and chose to pay it instead of confronting what rang from that tower every night. It all made a sick kind of sense. The missing records, the erased photos, the shifting graves. The bell. It wasn't calling out for help. It was marking the next one in line. A countdown, a ritual. And the closer I got to the truth, the louder it rang. Until the sound wasn't in the air anymore. It was inside me, vibrating through my bones, my teeth, my spine, telling me I was already part of it. That I'd always been. And now I had a choice. Either vanish like the others, or dig up the rest of the truth and hope I could survive it. It was the night I finally broke down and called the police that everything came to a head. I hadn't slept in over 36 hours. My phone had wiped itself again, but I'd taken to writing numbers down manually, like some kind of doomsday prepper. I dialed the local non-emergency line, tried to keep my voice steady, and told them I'd found a possible burial site near an old cemetery. I didn't mention the bell, didn't mention the dreams or the name carved in stone or the tunnel full of initials. Just the physical evidence. I figured if they came out and saw what I'd found, the hatch, the grave mounds, they'd take it from there. Maybe they'd even shut the place down. And if I was lucky, maybe that would stop the bell from ringing. But deep down, I already knew it wouldn't. They agreed to send someone out the next day. Said a deputy would meet me near the old fire trail at 10 a.m. sharp. I didn't sleep that night either. I sat on the floor of my living room with the lights off, not because I wanted darkness, but because it didn't matter anymore. The shadows came no matter what I did. At midnight, the bell rang again, louder, clearer, and then it rang a second time. And a third. I counted 7 chimes. 1 for each of the figures I'd drawn without remembering. 1 for each name in the veil ground. I felt them vibrate through my ribs like warnings. The sound came from every direction, including inside my own skull. When it stopped, the silence wasn't relief, it was a threat. A pause between verses. I knew something was coming. Next, I met the deputy right where they said he'd be. A younger guy, maybe late 20s. His name was Dorsey. Looked half bored, half annoyed. Probably figured I was some conspiracy nut looking to play amateur archaeologist. I led him up the trail, tried to stay professional, kept the conversation light. But the closer we got to the cemetery, the more his face changed. His steps slowed. His breathing grew shallow. When we reached the bell tower, he stood there for a long moment, just staring at it, like something about it struck a nerve. He didn't know he had. I pointed out the hatch behind it, told him what I'd seen, what I'd found. He followed me to the metal door, knelt down, ran his hand along the rusted edge, then stood and looked at me hard. "You said this was open when you found it?" I nodded. It's sealed now, and it was, welded shut. Like someone had come in the night and closed it for good. Dorsey didn't say much after that. He walked a slow circle around the tower, glanced at the unmarked graves, then jotted something in his little notepad. I waited, heart hammering, expecting questions. Instead, he simply said, "We'll file a report. If it's a safety concern, we'll flag it to the county." That was it. I asked if he wanted to see the page I'd found, the one with the bodies and the writing. He hesitated, then said, "We'll take your word for it." I knew that tone. It was the same one people use when they're humoring someone they've already written off. But I also saw something else in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, not disbelief, not confusion, recognition, like he'd seen this before or heard stories about it. But he wasn't going to talk, not there, not in front of the tower. Looking back though, I should have been surprised when he told me to delete the pictures. He said it casually, like it was just a safety measure. "Too many people poking around these woods lately," he mumbled. "Don't want someone else getting lost out here." I didn't argue. I just pretended to scroll through and erase them. But the truth is, there was nothing left to delete. All my images again had been replaced by solid black squares. Not blurry, not corrupted. Just flat, empty black. Like my phone had taken pictures of a void. On the way back down the trail, Dorsey paused and said, "You live around here?" I told him the street. He nodded slowly, eyes narrowing. Then he said, "You ever hear anything at night?" The question hit me like a slap. I asked what he meant, but he didn't answer. Just stared down the trail, jaw tight, then said, "Don't go back up there alone." I asked if that was advice or a warning. He didn't answer that either. We parted ways at the fire road, and as I watched him drive off, I felt more alone than I had in weeks. It was like the ground beneath me had shifted and no one else noticed. Like the world had started tilting and I was the only one slipping off the edge. That night, I tried to leave town. I packed a bag, grabbed Max, and got in my car with no plan other than away. I didn't care where I went, just that it was far enough from that forest, that tower, that sound. I made it about 15 miles before the radio cut out, the headlights flickered, and the engine died completely in the middle of an empty back road. No cell signal, no other cars, just me, the cat, and the dark. I sat there for an hour, waiting for someone to come by. When I finally stepped out to check under the hood, the bell rang. Clear, loud, right next to me. I spun in place, heart hammering in my chest, and there it was. Not the tower, not a person, just a figure standing at the edge of the tree line, watching, holding something in its hand. Something small and glowing. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember turning the key. All I know is that when I woke up, I was in my bed, shoes on, clothes soaked, the cat curled beside me. My phone showed it was 3:33 a.m., and my call log said I'd tried to dial a number that didn't exist. The contact's name was just 3 dashes. My legs were sore like I'd walked for miles, and my keys once again were missing. I found them the next day in my mailbox, along with a dead bird and a clump of dirt that smelled like it had been dug straight out of a grave. That was when I realized the bell wasn't ringing to haunt me anymore. It was claiming me. One chime at a time, I tried reaching out to the local news station. I sent them everything: photos, journal entries, the timeline of events. I begged them to look into it, to send someone out. I got one response. It was from a reporter named Jules who asked for a phone interview. We talked for an hour. She seemed interested, even concerned. She promised to call back the next day. She never did. When I searched her name a week later, I found her obituary. Died in her sleep. No foul play. No signs of illness. Just didn't wake up. Her last published article? A fluff piece about the local farmer's market. Nothing about me. Nothing about the bell. It was like our conversation had never happened. After that, I stopped trying to involve people. I stayed inside most days, curtains drawn, phone off. The bell came at odd hours now, not just midnight, sometimes at dawn. Sometimes during dinner. It didn't matter where I was. The sound found me. Once, I heard it while I was standing in the frozen food aisle of a grocery store. No one else seemed to notice. But the woman behind the checkout looked up at me with wide eyes and whispered, "You hear it too?" That was all she said. She never rang up my groceries. Just walked out the front door without a word. I left everything behind and went home. I don't know what the final step is. I don't know how much longer I have. But I've started dreaming of a grave again. Just one, fresh, waiting, and each time I look inside it, I see something new. Sometimes it's me. Sometimes it's someone I've never met. But the worst dream, the one that shakes me awake in a sweat, was the one where the grave was empty, and I heard the bell, and the voice that followed said, "You're late." That's when it hit me. I was supposed to answer it. I'd waited too long. And now, it's coming to find me itself. It's been almost 6 months since I last stepped foot in Krausfield. I haven't driven past the trailhead. I haven't looked at the satellite maps. I moved apartments, quit my job, changed my number, anything I could do to disconnect from that place. But none of it mattered. None of it worked. The bell still rings. Not every night now, but often enough to remind me. Sometimes it skips a few days, and I let myself believe it's over. Then it comes back, louder than before, as if it's angry I let my guard down. I've learned not to react when I hear it. I don't run anymore. I don't scream. I just listen. That seems to be what it wants, to be heard. And I think that's how it starts, how it binds to you. Through attention. Through belief. I see the signs everywhere now. Not just in dreams, but in waking moments I wish were dreams. I'll be walking past a building and glance in a window only to catch my reflection, smiling even when I'm not. Or I'll check the time and see 12 o'clock, even when my watch and my phone say something else. Once, I opened my closet and found a trail of black dirt leading in a perfect circle around my shoes. Another time, I left a voicemail for my sister, and when she called back, she was in tears. Said she listened to the message 3 times and could only hear a bell, faint but steady, ringing in the background every time I spoke. She asked if I'd done it on purpose. I told her no. I haven't heard from her since. I've tried everything burning. Sage, sleeping at friends' places, even leaving offerings at places I read about online. I don't even know who I'm offering them to. But something's always missing the next morning. Coins, salt, a lock of hair. Always something small, always something intimate. And sometimes something appears in its place. A cracked marble, a fragment of bone, a piece of paper with my handwriting on it, except I know I didn't write the words. One note read, "Only the buried are safe." Another said, "You are ringing now." That one shook me, because I had just woken up from a dream where I was the bell, not hearing it being it. I felt my ribs vibrate with every chime, like my bones were hollowed out and strung with rope. Looking back, though, I should have expected it to reach further. I started getting packages. No return address. No postage. Just boxes left on my doorstep, sealed with brittle old twine. The first one had dirt. That was it, just a shoebox full of black, clumped soil. The second had a photograph, faded, sepia-toned, of the bell tower when it was still intact, no vines or moss. But standing in front of it was a group of 7 figures, all wearing plain clothes, all barefoot, all facing away from the camera. On the back, someone had written, "The bell never calls twice for the same soul." I keep the photo hidden now. I tried burning it once. It didn't catch fire. Just curled at the edges like it was pretending to burn while staying perfectly preserved beneath the ash. I don't talk to people much anymore. I've learned that the more I share, the more danger they seem to be in. One friend I confided in called me at 3 a.m. 2 nights later, whispering frantically that something was tapping on her window, even though she lived on the 10th floor of a high-rise. She moved out of state the next week, deleted her socials, sent one final text, "Don't ever say its name again." She never even used the word Krausfield, and still it reached her. That's when I stopped telling anyone new. If you're reading this, I hope that's enough of a warning. I'm only writing this down now because I think someone needs to know what happens when you listen too closely. The bell still comes, but now I think I've started to understand it. Or maybe not understand translate. I don't know how, but the tone of each chime feels different. I can sense what it wants. When it rings low, it's a warning. When it comes sharp and sudden, it's marking something. Like time or distance or pain. The worst is when it's soft, almost gentle. That's when I know it's near. Inside. The walls, under the bed, behind the mirror. Not looking to scare me, just watching, just waiting. Like it's not a thing, but a place, and it's growing, inch by inch, until there's no space left where it doesn't exist. Last night, I got a call. No number, just the word Krausfield glowing across the screen like it was part of my contacts list. I let it ring. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe. Stupidity. When I finally answered, there was no voice on the other end. Just the bell. One chime. Then silence. Then a whisper so faint I couldn't even be sure it was real. But I think it said, "The ground is ready." My phone immediately powered off. Battery fully drained. When I turned it back on the next morning, every app icon had changed. Not drastically, just subtly. A color off here, a symbol skewed there. Things that made me feel like I was looking at a copy of my phone, not the real thing. Like I'd crossed over without realizing. I sleep less and less now. Not because I'm afraid of what I'll see, but because I'm afraid I won't. That one day, the bell will ring and I won't hear it. That I'll miss the warning and wake up somewhere else entirely, buried so deep that not even the dead can reach me. Sometimes I think about going back to the cemetery, walking straight into the woods, finding the hatch, and crawling down into the tunnel one last time. Maybe it wants me to do that. Maybe I already have, and this is just the memory of a man trying to convince himself he's still on the surface. I don't know anymore. That's the thing. Reality doesn't bend here, it rots. Quietly, steadily, from the inside out. And now, just as I'm writing this, something else has happened. Just 20 minutes ago, I heard someone knock on my door. Not loud, just a single knock. But when I opened it, no one was there, only a package, no label. Inside was a small wooden box, polished and heavy. I opened it carefully and found something inside that nearly made me drop it at a small brass key, ornate, cold, familiar, the kind I'd seen in the old township records vault back when I first started digging through the cemetery's paperwork. Tied to nothing, belonging to no lock that still exists. Except maybe that hatch. Maybe it's open again. Or maybe now. I am. So, if you've read all this, if you still think you can walk into old places without consequence, listen to me. Not all cemeteries want peace. Some places don't just hold the dead, they keep them interested. And Krausfield? It remembers. Every step, Every name, every word whispered near the tower. You don't find it. It lets you come. And when the bell rings, that's not a call. It's a claim, and it's made one on me. I just don't know how much longer I'll be able to resist answering it again. My family never fit the mold of what most people expect. We weren't close in the traditional sense. No Sunday dinners, no birthday parties, but we did have a tradition, an unusual one. It started long before I was born, passed down from my grandmother's side, and I know how ridiculous this sounds, but it involved spending time in a cemetery. Not just visiting graves or tending headstones. This was more involved. We were the caretakers of a plot no one ever claimed. A space with no names, no markers, just a circular patch of overgrown grass beneath an old twisted tree on the edge of the county graveyard. We called it the Hollow Lot. Every family had their role. My Uncle Tobias trimmed the brush. My cousin Nell laid flowers wild, never store-bought. My dad kept the old wooden gate greased and locked, and me. My job was to watch, not guard, not protect, just watch. Every Thursday at dusk, one of us had to be there, seated on the low bench made of cracked limestone. No lights, no phone, no distractions, from dusk to midnight. The rule was simple: sit, stay quiet, and if you see her, don't look away, ever. That was the whole deal. And as weird as it sounds, it was taken seriously. Even when I was a kid and didn't understand why, I never questioned it. No one ever did. I was 15 the first time I took the bench by myself. My dad walked me to the lot, handed me the old wind-up watch, and told me not to move until it struck midnight. Don't speak. Don't sleep. Don't run, he said. And then he left me there in the twilight, surrounded by graves with nothing but a blanket and an old lantern. I remember thinking it was a test, like some kind of warped rite of passage. It didn't help that the rest of the cemetery was oddly peaceful quiet, still, almost like it was holding its breath. I didn't see anything that first night. No one did the first time. That was the rule too, apparently. The first time is always quiet. It's meant to make you let your guard down. Again, I know how strange this all sounds, but I swear it's the truth. Over the years, I watched others take the bench, saw them return pale, tight-lipped, eyes darting behind them even in broad daylight. My cousin Nell once sat for the full shift and didn't speak for 3 days afterward. My uncle never did it alone after his second time. He always brought something, a charm, a photo, once even a Bible. He wouldn't talk about what he saw, just said, "She was closer this time." That's when I started asking questions. My dad didn't like that. Saad talking about her gave her weight. But the answers came anyway, just in pieces, like scraps of fabric from a burned coat. The woman in black wasn't a ghost. She was something older. Something that watched the family and the family watched her back, hoping to keep her at bay. The cemetery itself was split into 2 halves. The front was well kept, with granite headstones and fresh flowers, but the back, that's where the Hollow Lot was. Overgrown, sunken, silent. No birds, no squirrels, no wind, just stillness. And at the center, the old tree. Its bark was blackened, not from fire but time, and its limbs curled upward like fingers reaching for something just out of sight. I used to wonder why no one ever asked about it, why the groundskeeper never cleared the space. But the truth was, I think they knew better. That part of the cemetery didn't get touched. It didn't change. It just waited. My dad always said we weren't cursed. We were responsible. That it wasn't punishment, but a deal. One that kept everyone else safe. And as much as I hated the ritual, the weird stories, the isolation, I believed him. We never had a major accident in our family, never lost anyone suddenly, never had unexplained tragedies like other people in town. Maybe that was enough proof, but it also meant that every Thursday one of us had to go. No excuses, even on holidays, even when sick, even when tired. And if someone missed their shift, another had to step in immediately. Because missing a Thursday wasn't just breaking a rule, it was breaking the agreement. Looking back, I realize how trapped we all were. But when you grow up with something like that, it doesn't feel like a trap, it feels like truth. Like brushing your teeth or locking your doors at night. I never imagined it could get worse. I thought as long as we followed the rules, we'd be fine. But then came the burial. A mistake, they said. A paperwork error. A stranger was buried in the hollow lot without our permission. The groundskeeper was new. He didn't know. No one told him. The grave was shallow, the stone plain and cheap, no inscription. But from the moment the soil was turned, everything changed. She came more often, closer, faster, and then the mourner appeared. It was Nell who first saw her. At least, she was. The first to say it out loud. She's not just standing by the tree anymore. She whispered one night after her shift. She's sitting on the bench where we sit. My dad brushed it off as nerves, but I saw the way his hand shook. After, he believed her. We all did. Still, we didn't stop. We couldn't. The next Thursday, it was my turn. And that was the night I saw her too, the woman in black. Not standing among the graves, not drifting like a shadow in the distance, but seated beside me. Right there. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I barely breathed. I only looked ahead. I followed the rule. And still, I felt her lean in, her breath cold against my ear. She whispered one word, wrong. I didn't sleep for 2 days after that. We thought maybe the burial was the cause. That disturbing the hollow lot had weakened whatever kept her tethered to that space. But then we started to see the mourner outside the cemetery. A veiled figure in black, walking slowly down the street near the church, standing under the lamplight by the courthouse, watching from the field behind our uncle's barn, always still, always silent, but always there. We didn't know if it was her, or someone new. A copy, a sign, but the veil matched, the posture matched, and wherever she appeared, something went wrong soon after. A broken bone, a burned barn, a miscarriage. It didn't matter how far away she was. Her presence meant consequence. I begged my dad to let us stop, to find a way to close the hollow lot for good, to walk away from it all. He said we couldn't, that the family was chosen long ago, and if we quit, we'd lose everything. Not just our lives, he said. Our souls. I don't think he was being poetic. I think he meant it literally. That watching wasn't About tradition, it was payment. For what, he wouldn't say. But whatever deal had been made, we were still paying it. And now, with the mourner moving, spreading, we were behind on our balance. There were rules to the mourner's ritual specific, memorized steps that had been passed down like scripture through every branch of our family tree. And they weren't suggestions, they were commandments, rigid and absolute. My dad had a notebook, thick and stained, filled with scribbled versions of them from different relatives. Some were written in neat cursive, others frantic block letters. Each generation had added clarifications, interpretations, and new details discovered after something went wrong. Every rule had a reason, and every reason had a story we weren't supposed to ask about too directly. That was how the tradition worked. The truth was never handed over in full. It had to be earned, shift by shift, mistake by mistake. The first rule was simple. Someone must be on the bench at dusk every Thursday without fail, no matter the weather, no matter the date. If no one sat, the mourner would wander. The second rule was more specific. Once seated, you cannot leave. Until exactly midnight. Early exits invited her to follow. Staying later blurred the boundary between her world and ours. If the old wind-up watch stopped working, you left when the moon reached its highest point, assuming it was visible. If the night was cloudy, you waited for the sound. 3 soft knocks on the ground beneath your feet. That meant she had passed, and it was safe to rise. I know how ridiculous this sounds, like some backwoods ghost story, but I swear to you, the way my family lived, it wasn't myth. It was manual. There were guidelines for posture. Don't slouch, eye contact, only forward, even breath control. Don't exhale too loud. No food, no drink, no speaking. You sat with your hands folded, eyes fixed ahead, and endured the hours. Like penance. If you saw her, which almost everyone did eventually, you never acknowledged it. Not with a glance. Not with a flinch. If she came close enough to touch the bench, you weren't allowed to move until she was gone. One cousin did and broke her hip walking back up the cemetery path. Another stood up early. He never made it home. They found him at sunrise, curled. At the edge of the lot, eyes open, mouth full of dirt. We had specific equipment, too. The bench was considered sacred, but fragile. It had to be cleaned each week with water from the old well behind the cemetery's chapel. Not just any water, that water. Something about the minerals, they said. Or maybe it was just the tradition. The lantern we used had to be oil-fed, no bulbs, no LEDs. The light had to flicker. Steady light, like a flashlight, drew her closer. That was one of the newer notes in the notebook, added after my cousin Tom brought an LED camping lamp and claimed she stood behind him the whole time. I didn't even hear her come up, he told us later. I just saw the shadow on the ground, and it wasn't mine. He quit the ritual after that, moved 3 states away. We don't talk about what happened to him after, but he hasn't posted online in years. Another critical rule involved the flowers. Wild, never bought. And they had to be foraged that day, not the day before. Daisies were safest. Marigolds worked if picked near water. Anything red or thorned was forbidden. My aunt once brought roses, just a handful. She said she was in a rush and forgot. The next night, her house caught fire. No one was hurt, but the only thing that didn't burn was the chair she used during her watch. It sat untouched in the blackened living room, with one single rose laid across the seat. We all saw the picture. No one ever brought roses again, over time. We started tracking patterns, trying to make sense of her behavior. She only ever appeared after full moons. Never during them. Rain made her more active. Fog meant she wouldn't come at all. If you heard crying faint and far off, you had about 5 minutes before she arrived. If you smelled lily, it was too late. And if the tree dropped a branch during your watch, you didn't come back the next week. That was her way of marking someone for rest. It had only happened twice in my lifetime. Both marked were dead within months. Natural causes, sure, but too soon, too sudden, too close to be coincidence. The rules weren't just about safety. They were about containment. We believed we knew that as long as the rituals were followed, she would stay near the hollow lot, that her gaze wouldn't stretch beyond the tree line, that we could keep the town, our neighbors, even the world at large, safe from something none of us truly understood. But once the burial happened, the mistake, the disruption, that illusion cracked. And with it came the mourner's new behavior. She stopped staying still, stopped following the schedule. We began seeing her on Fridays, then Wednesdays, eventually even on Monday mornings, standing across from the schoolyard, never moving, just standing, waiting. And that's when we realized the bench wasn't enough anymore. I think the real shift came when the mourner started mimicking us. It sounds insane, I know. But it started subtly. She appeared with her head tilted the way Aunt May always sat. Then with a shawl that matched Nell's. Then one night, I swear I saw her wearing my jacket. I hadn't worn it to the lot yet. It was just one I left in my car. But it was unmistakable olive green, frayed collar, missing button. I saw it hanging from her shoulders, motionless, the veil still covering her face, and I couldn't move. I nearly broke the rule that night. I nearly ran. But I didn't. I stayed. I kept my eyes forward. And in my peripheral vision, I watched her pull something from her pocket. My lighter. I hadn't even realized it was gone. That's when I started keeping a list, not just of items that vanished, but of how they disappeared. A bracelet left on the porch, gone by dawn. A book of matches from a watch night kit, replaced with ash. My phone? Not missing, but the photos in it had changed. Pictures of my friends now showed her in the background, way off in the distance. Always blurry, always mid-step. Sometimes just a sleeve or a shoe, but she was there. And that meant one of two things. Either she had been with me in those moments, or something had made it look that way. I don't know which is worse. We held a meeting, all the remaining family, every blood relative who knew the rules. We met in my uncle's basement, surrounded by candles and old photo albums. My dad brought the notebook. My aunt brought a bundle of sage wrapped in silk. My cousin Nell, who'd always been calm, was crying before we even started. "We're losing control," she said. "She's learning." We all knew she was. Right. The rules were no longer working the way they used to. It was like she was adapting, watching how we handled the rituals and finding the cracks to slip through. The fact that she was appearing in daylight, that she was mimicking our clothes, that she moved now, All of it pointed to something bigger than a haunting. Something with a plan we considered stopping. For the first time in generations, someone actually said it out loud. "What happens if we just stop?" my uncle asked. The silence that followed was the loudest moment of the night. My dad finally spoke. "We've never tested it. And we shouldn't." The room stayed quiet. But we all knew we might not have a choice, because even if we sat the bench, even if we laid the flowers ... even if we watched without blinking, she was already slipping the leash. And the mourner, in black, didn't look like she wanted peace. She looked like she wanted out. My next turn on the bench came just 2 weeks after our family's emergency meeting. Despite everything we'd discussed, the mimicry, the movements, the signs she was shifting, I still volunteered. Not because I wasn't scared, I was, but because something in me felt like I had to go. Maybe it was pride, maybe guilt, or maybe I just wanted to see for myself how bad it had gotten. I followed every instruction exactly, down to the flower choice. I picked fresh daisies from behind the old Lutheran church 2 towns over, just like the notebook said. I cleaned the bench with water from the chapel well. I checked the lantern wick twice, used the old oil we kept in the brown glass bottle. Under the sink, I even wore my grandfather's coat, the one lined with salt packets and lavender. He used to say it kept the worst of her away. I arrived just before sunset. The hollow lot was still and colorless in the evening light. The wind didn't move the tall grass. The tree stood hunched, black as ever, its limbs angled in that grotesque reaching posture. I lit the lantern and placed it beside the bench, laid the daisies at the base of the tree, then sat down and waited. I don't know if you've ever spent 6 hours in silence in the open with no phone, no music, no movement allowed. It does something to your head. Time breaks apart. Your thoughts grow louder. Your fears start to echo. The first hour passed like syrup. My breath felt too loud. Every rustle in the distance turned my skin cold. I counted stars to stay calm, traced shapes in the clouds, anything to keep from thinking about her. But that never works for long. By hour 2, the ground started to hum. That's how I always knew she was near. It wasn't sound exactly, more like a presence that made the dirt beneath your boots feel unsettled, as if it could breathe. I stared ahead, eyes locked on the crooked silhouette of the tree, and I waited. The air shifted. The lantern's flame dipped just once, and then I saw her. Not in the distance, not under the tree, closer. Standing maybe 20 feet to my right, veil down, arms crossed in front of her like she was holding something. It was the first time I'd seen her so early in the watch. Usually, she came near the end between 11 o'clock and 11:45. This was barely past 9, and she wasn't moving. She just stood there, the dark folds of her dress melting into the grass, her outline flickering at the edge of my peripheral vision like a camera focus that refused to lock on. I followed the rule. I didn't turn. I didn't acknowledge her. I kept my eyes forward and my breathing low. But I could feel her watching me. Not vaguely. Not conceptually. Specifically. Her attention pressed against my neck like a cold thumb. I held still, sweat running down the backs of my knees, pulse pounding in my ears. I tried to remember what Nell had said, that she moved if you showed fear. But how do you not show fear when something that isn't supposed to move is standing 10 feet from you, holding your attention like a hook through skin? I clenched my hands together so hard my knuckles cracked. The sound echoed too loud in the silence. I felt the shift immediately. The mourner took a step forward. My heart nearly stopped. I didn't move, but I knew she had crossed the invisible line. No one could remember the exact distance. It wasn't measured in feet. It was measured in feeling, in pull. And she had never stepped into that space before. I could hear the grass brushing against her dress now. The tiny snap of stems. My breath caught as I watched her shadow lengthen across the field. She didn't stop. Another step. Then another. I had no choice but to sit there, following the rule, obeying the ancient deal, and feeling the mourner circle behind me with that eerie, patient pace. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. But I think I left my body for a while. Everything felt distant, like I was underwater watching a version of myself sit rigid and alone in the dark, while something impossible brushed against my shoulder. The strangest part was the cold. I'd always heard people talk about ghosts, dropping the temperature in a room, but this wasn't that. It wasn't a chill, it was absence. Heat didn't just vanish, it was pulled out of me, siphoned, like I was feeding something just by being there. I started shivering, teeth clenching, muscles spasming in small waves. Still, I didn't move. The mourner stood behind me for what must have been 40 minutes. I could feel her, unmoving, presence expanding like a pressure system ready to collapse. I remember thinking, I followed every rule. I've done everything right. But she wasn't following rules anymore. And she was teaching me that they didn't apply to her the same way they applied to us. When midnight struck, 3 slow chimes on the old wind-up, I expected her to vanish like always. Most times, the moment the last chime hit, she would retreat, dissolve into the shadows like breath in cold air. But not this time. She didn't move, not right away. Instead, she whispered something behind me. Not loud, not even fully audible. Just the shape of words with no voice. I couldn't tell if they were in English or human. They scraped at the back of my teeth like static. My stomach turned and my ears started to ring. I felt blood come out of my nose and run down my lip, warm against the cold. Then finally she stepped away, not quickly, not startled, just slowly with the kind of poise you only see in statues. Each step away felt like a rope being untied from my spine. I didn't get up right away. I couldn't. My legs were dead. Weight, my hands raw from gripping my coat. It took me almost 10 minutes to lift myself off the bench. The lantern had gone out. The flowers were gone too. Not trampled, not blown away. Just gone. Like someone had plucked them gently from the ground and carried them off. I looked around, checking the path, checking the graves beyond the lot. No sign of anyone. No sound. Just that heavy, impossible silence, thick like wool in the air. I limped my way back up the hill and didn't speak to anyone the next morning. I couldn't. Words felt broken in my mouth. And when I checked my reflection later that day, I swear I saw her standing behind me for a moment, blurry and dark, just. Before the mirror cracked, I told my dad what happened. Told him about the whisper, about the physical closeness, about the missing flowers. He sat in silence, rubbing his thumb over the cracked leather of the notebook's spine. Then he said something I'll never forget. If she's speaking now, we're past the edge. I asked him what that meant, and he said, it means she knows we're listening. After that, he started packing a box. Old charms, family photos, a length of rope soaked in rosemary oil. When I asked where he was, going, he said, back to where it started. But he never told me where that was. He left the next day. Never came back. After my dad disappeared, things unraveled faster than I thought possible. We didn't even have time to sit with it. No search, no memorial, no space to grieve, just a phone call from his job saying he never came in, and a car found empty near a trailhead no one recognized. The keys were still in the ignition. His wallet was on the passenger seat, folded shut around a piece of paper with no writing on it. Just an indentation where someone had pressed down with. A pen hard enough to leave marks, but never ink. The lines looked like handwriting, but the more you stared at them, the more they bled together into something that didn't feel like language. I know how that sounds. I know how all of this sounds. But that was the beginning of what we started, calling the bleed. When she stopped confining herself to the hollow lot and began showing up everywhere else, we used to think she was tethered to that tree, that the mourner's reach stopped at the edge of the cemetery. That was the purpose of the watch, to keep her still, to hold her there through attention and ritual. But the Thursday after my father left, Nell was assigned the bench. I wasn't there, but I remember how pale she looked when she got back. She wouldn't go inside the house, just stood on the porch for hours, arms folded across her chest like she was still sitting. Finally, I walked out and asked what happened. Her voice was flat. She walked away, she said. I didn't understand. What do you mean? I asked. Nell stared straight ahead. She came to the bench, looked at me, then turned and walked. Through the gate. No one stopped her. I didn't stop her. She didn't cry. She didn't even blink. She just said, I think it's too late now. That same night, I saw her. Not at the cemetery. Not in a dream. I was walking to the back shed to grab an old box fan when I saw something move in the far corner of the yard. I thought it was a deer at first, tall, still, watching. But then, the lantern light caught the hem of her dress. Black, velvet-looking, it didn't flap in the breeze. It hung, heavy and stiff, like it carried the weight of centuries. I froze. She wasn't supposed to be there. That wasn't Thursday. That wasn't the hollow lot. But there she stood, veil down, hands folded exactly like we'd all learned to expect. I backed away slowly, never turning my back to her. She didn't follow, didn't blink, but the air around her felt wrong. Thick, not hot or cold, just wrong. Like the humidity of a place that wasn't real trying to push its way into ours. When I told my family what I'd seen, no one doubted me. That was the most terrifying part. No one even questioned it. My aunt just nodded and poured salt across the doorway. My cousin began tying twine around the bedposts in every room. We all moved in together after that, for protection, for safety in numbers. Or maybe because none of us wanted to be alone when it finally happened, whatever it was. Nell slept during the day and kept watch at night, even on nights that weren't Thursday. We started hearing things between the walls. We started losing time. Meals burned on the stove we swore we hadn't left on. Books rearranged themselves. One morning, all the family portraits had been flipped face down. No wind, no pets, no drafts. Just turned, deliberate, like someone was walking through the house while we slept. The worst moment came when we got a letter, a real one, postmarked and everything. It had no return address, but it was sealed with black wax. Inside was a single, photo grainy and yellowing. It showed the mourner standing in front of a house, our house. The angle matched the backyard. You could see the edge of the tool shed in the corner. In the photo, her hands weren't folded. One hand was raised, index finger pointing straight at the camera. Or, more accurately, at whoever had taken the picture. At us, on the back, was a smudged fingerprint in what looked like ash. My uncle insisted it was a prank, said we'd all gotten worked up. But 2 days later, he was gone. His truck was found still running, door open, parked crooked at the edge of a drainage ditch. The engine was humming. The seat was still warm. But he wasn't there. That's when we knew she wasn't just bleeding into our lives. She was targeting, picking us off, watching us as we watched her. And whatever used to bind her to the hollow, Lot wasn't holding anymore. We tried to double up the watches, sit in pairs. One person facing forward, one person scanning the field. But it didn't help. My cousin Robert was with Nell when the mourner appeared between them, not in front, not behind, between. No one saw her move. One moment, the space was empty. The next, she was there, seated on the ground, veil off, lips moving, but no sound came out. Robert left the state that weekend. He sold his car for cash, tossed his phone in a river, and vanished. I got a postcard from him months later. No return address, just the words, "She speaks in silence." Don't let her finish the sentence. I burned the postcard without telling anyone. I started noticing her outside of the cemetery more often than not. Reflections in car windows, glimpses in alleyways, brief flashes of black just as I turned a corner. But the most horrifying moment wasn't when I saw her, it was when I didn't. I was driving past the cemetery one evening, trying to avoid the route altogether, when I glanced over and saw the hollow lot completely empty. No mourner, no flowers, no movement, just an absence. And somehow, that felt more terrifying than seeing her, because it meant she was somewhere else, somewhere closer, somewhere unguarded. The absence of her was louder than her presence ever was. It screamed in my bones. I drove straight home, locked every door, turned off every light, and sat in the hallway with my back against the wall for hours. I didn't even know what I was waiting for. I just knew it was near. A week later, someone left a bundle on our porch, wrapped in a black veil. It looked like an infant, swaddled in fabric and tied with old twine. We didn't want to open it. Who would? But eventually, curiosity won. Inside was a collection of our own belongings. Nell's bracelet, my dad's watch, a burnt piece of Robert's shirt, even a half-melted lighter I thought I'd lost months ago. At the very bottom of the bundle was something none of us recognized, a ring. Worn, tarnished, engraved with symbols that didn't match any language we knew. We buried the bundle behind the house, salted the ground, and said every prayer we could remember. But we all knew it was a warning, a message. She could reach us anywhere now. The moment I realized we couldn't trust each other anymore was so quiet, so subtle, I almost missed it. We were all sitting at the dinner table, those of us who were left. Nell, my aunt, my cousin Julia, and me. 4 plates. 4 glasses. 4 sets of eyes that had been through weeks of horror and silence together, and yet something didn't sit right. I couldn't explain it. It was the way Julia held her fork. She'd always been left-handed, ever since we were kids. But that night, she was using her right. At first, I thought maybe it was nothing. People adapt. Habits shift. But then I saw her hesitate, like she was thinking through each bite. Like she was copying a movement she'd watched before but never done herself. I tried to brush it off, but Nell caught my eye from across the table. And I knew then she'd seen it too. Later that night, I asked Nell about it directly. I didn't want to accuse anyone. God knows we were all already on edge. But I had to ask. She didn't say anything for a full minute. Then she whispered. Her voice sounds different now. I didn't need to ask who she meant. Julia, I said. Nell nodded, then added, she called me by my full name the other day. No one in the family does that, not even when they're mad. And her smell is off, like she doesn't sweat. Just ... Cold fabric and soil. I felt sick. The idea that the mourner might not just be mimicking us from a distance, but actively replacing us, moving inside the family like a virus, was something none of us had prepared for. All the rituals, all the rules, they were built to keep her out, not to stop her once she was already in. I know how paranoid this all sounds. I know how easy it would be to blame stress or trauma or collective grief. But it wasn't just Julia. It started with her, but it didn't stop there. My aunt began forgetting things, big things, like which room she slept in, or who Nell was. One night, she set 5 places at the table, even though there were only 4 of us. When I asked why, she looked confused, then laughed and said, "He'll be here soon." When I asked who, she just blinked slowly and said, "The one who always stands behind you." I didn't finish my meal that night. I sat on the porch instead, gripping the notebook in my lap, flipping pages I already knew by heart, praying I'd missed some entry, some hidden line about what to do if she started getting inside. But there was nothing. No contingency for this. The mourner wasn't just moving anymore. She was evolving, slipping into cracks we didn't know we had. My dreams changed too. I stopped seeing her at the edge of fields or standing beneath the tree. Instead, I started seeing her through my own eyes. I was the one wearing the veil. I was the one walking the lot. I'd look down and see her hands, my hands pale, shaking, always holding something I couldn't identify, some object that pulsed like a heartbeat. In one dream, I approached the bench and saw myself sitting there, face blank, eyes wide, as I, the version in the veil, slowly raised a finger to my lips and whispered, "Soon." When I woke up, my mouth was full of dirt. We started testing each other without saying that's what we were doing. Little questions, old memories, nicknames. I asked Julia what we called the cat we found in the shed when we were 10. She answered, "Pepper," but I saw the flicker of delay behind her eyes. We called it pickle, only for a month, only during that summer. It was such a dumb, specific memory, but the kind you don't forget. Not if you really lived it. My aunt asked me to recite the old nursery rhyme we learned from my grandmother. I sang the first 2 lines perfectly, but then stopped when I realized I didn't remember the third. But that was the thing none of us did. We all paused, looked at each other, realized there were holes in our memories we hadn't noticed before. And that was when Nell said it. Maybe it's not about replacing us. Maybe it's about erasing us, piece by piece. It felt like the mourner was dismantling who we were, reassembling us slowly, carefully, so no one outside the house would notice. Our neighbors hadn't asked questions. None of our coworkers had checked in. When I went to the store, I didn't recognize anyone anymore. The cashier who'd been there for years. Gone, replaced by someone with a tight smile and empty eyes. The mailman was new. The woman across the street never opened her curtains anymore. The world was shrinking, condensing into a version of itself where only we, and whatever the mourner, had become remained, and worse, I started wondering if we had already been replaced. If the we sitting around the table, playing detective with each other's habits, weren't the originals at all. Just versions of ourselves trying to pretend we still belong to something human. The final confirmation came during a Thursday. Watch. It was Nell's turn, but I insisted on going with her. I couldn't let her sit alone. We lit 2 lanterns. Brought fresh-cut flowers, marigolds this time. Sat quietly, side by side. For a while, nothing happened. Just the usual tension. But around 10:30, we both heard it. Not footsteps. Footfall. The kind you feel before you hear. The mourner appeared not in the field, not under the tree, but at the top of the hill behind. The bench. She didn't walk. She shifted. One moment she wasn't there. The next she was. And then she was gone again. Then reappeared 20 feet closer. Each blink brought her nearer. She was glitching toward us, skipping forward like a corrupted video. When she finally reached the tree, she knelt. We'd never seen her kneel before. Then she turned her head, looked directly at us, and smiled. Just once. Small, subtle, meant only for us. And behind the veil, I saw her face for the first time. It was Nell's. I didn't scream. Neither did she. We just sat there frozen. Neither of us spoke about it on the walk home. We couldn't. But the next morning, Nell was gone. Her bed was made. Her shoes still by the door. Her phone left on the counter with a single note typed into the Notes app. I think I've been her this whole time. I didn't show it to anyone. I just deleted it. Because if she was right, if she had been the mourner, or a version of her, or something between, then what did that make me? Or Julia? Or my aunt? I stopped asking questions after that. Because at some point, when you pull at the veil too long, it stops being a covering. It becomes a mirror. It started with a knock. Not at the front door. Not even on a wall. It came from inside the mirror. I was brushing my teeth, the bathroom light flickering like it had for weeks, when I heard it. One dull, deliberate knock. Just behind the glass. I froze. The sound didn't repeat. I leaned in, breath fogging the reflection, staring into my own eyes, and for the first time, they didn't look like mine. The pupils were too wide. the whites too yellow, and I wasn't blinking. My reflection stood perfectly still while I slowly backed away from the sink. When I looked over my shoulder, there was no one behind me, but when I turned back to the mirror, I was smiling. My reflection smiled at me. I dropped the toothbrush and ran out of the room without turning off the light. From that night on, the house began to feel smaller. Hallways that had always been there now ended abruptly. Doors led to places they shouldn't. I opened a closet and found it full of fog. Thick, warm, breathing fog that smelled like soil after a storm. I closed it and didn't check again. My aunt, once so precise and controlled, started speaking in rhymes under her breath, half prayers, half countdowns. She stopped answering to her name. One night, she walked straight out the front door at 2:17 a.m., barefoot, into the street. When I chased after her, she was already gone. I ran in every direction, screaming for her. But all I found were footsteps, hers and another pair, deeper, dragging, like someone wearing a dress too long for the road. I know how this sounds. I know people will call it hysteria or grief, but this wasn't psychological. This was spatial. Something was wrong with the house itself. We tried staying in one room, boarding the doors, keeping the lights on 24/7. It worked for 2 days. On the third, the bulbs popped one after the other like a slow ticking metronome. Then came the whispering. Not in our ears, but under the floorboards. It moved like something searching. A steady shuffle of syllables we couldn't quite understand, no matter how hard we strained. I thought I heard my name once. Then my cousins. Then names I didn't recognize. Old ones, names no one in the family had spoken in decades. Julia snapped first. I found her in the kitchen trying to dig into the tile with a steak knife. She kept saying, "She's under. She's always been under. We built over her." I took the knife away. She didn't resist. She just wept dry. Sobs, eyes vacant, hands trembling as if holding something she could still feel but no longer see. That night, she ran. I heard the front door open and slam shut, and when I rushed out after her, I caught only a glimpse of movement at the edge of the woods. A figure in black, a glint of silver near her hand, and something else laughter, soft, fragile, not cruel, but old, like something being released after holding its breath for too long. I screamed her name into the trees, but the mourner didn't look back. She never does. I ran. I didn't pack. I didn't plan. I just grabbed the notebook, my coat, and the old oil lantern. I didn't even take my phone. At that point, the phone wasn't even showing apps anymore, just a black screen with the words, "You know where to go." I drove for hours, not caring about direction. I just needed space, somewhere open, somewhere without mirrors or basements or locked doors that might not lead where they should. Eventually, I ended up near the cemetery again, not because I wanted to, but because it brought me there. That's how it works. You think you're escaping, but you're just circling back to the first crack in the wall. The original tear. The place where everything started bleeding through. The hollow lot looked the same, but wrong. The tree was taller. The bench was gone. Just gone, like it had never been there. In its place was a ring of wildflowers, fresh and vivid, laid in a perfect circle. I stood there, too exhausted to think, too broken to be afraid. That's when I saw her, the mourner. Not across the field, not hidden in shadow, but directly in front of me. Arms outstretched, veil lifted. Her face was my face, but not as I am, as I was. Pale, 15, afraid and eager on my first watch. Night, sitting on that bench with the wind brushing my cheeks. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there, holding my own memory up like a mask. And then she ran. I don't mean walked. I don't mean drifted. I mean ran at me, with arms stiff and head tilted, veil fluttering behind her like a second face. I turned and ran before I knew I was moving. I tore through the trees, branches ripping my coat, feet stumbling over roots I couldn't see. The lantern went out. I dropped the notebook. I ran like the air itself was collapsing behind me, like if I stopped even for a second, I'd be pulled back into her arms and never return. I could hear her steps behind me. No, not step scrapes. Her dress tearing through leaves. Her breath rising in a sound like wind through hollow bone. She never screamed. She never called. She didn't need to. I knew exactly who she was chasing. And I knew she was gaining ground. When I reached the road, she stopped. I didn't see it. I just felt it. Like someone cutting off a scream mid-breath. I collapsed onto the pavement, sobbing, shaking, my palms bloody, my throat raw. A passing car stopped. An old man stepped out, asked if I was okay. I tried to speak, tried to explain, but all I could do was point behind me. He looked, squinted, said, "There's nothing there, son." And maybe there wasn't. Maybe the mourner had stepped back across the line, or maybe he couldn't see her. Maybe you have to be chosen to see her, and once you are, you never stop. You never sleep without hearing the whisper of silk on stone. You never breathe without wondering if she's breathing too. They took me to a hospital, treated my wounds, asked questions. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because the moment I opened my mouth, I knew what would come out wouldn't be my voice, it would be hers. I could feel her sitting inside me, waiting for me to lose the strength to pretend I was still whole. I discharged myself after 3 days. They told me I was free to go. But I don't think I've ever really left. Not the mourner. Not the lot. Not the thing that chased me that night. I live in a motel now. Different city. Cash only. No real name on file. But the mirrors still hum when I get too close. The light still flickers when I say my name out loud. And I swear, some nights when I walk past the windows, I see my reflection staying still a second too long after I've passed. I thought leaving would be enough. That if I put miles between me and the hollow lot, if I cut myself off from the rituals, the family, the history, we'd both let go. But that's not how it works. The mourner isn't just a presence tied to a place. She's a pattern, a habit. She moves through behavior, memory, repetition. Wherever I go, I bring the rhythm with me. Wake up, avoid mirrors, check the corners. Of every room twice, count the knocks before answering any door. There's no peace, not really. Just gaps between moments of certainty and the quiet, gnawing sense that she's always one step behind. I don't think she follows in the usual way. I think she walks ahead, waiting for me to catch up to where she already is. For a while, I convinced myself I'd lost her. I stayed in the same room, kept the lights on, left offerings in the sink salt rosemary. Daisy petals, all the old signs of respect. It was stupid, or maybe just hopeful. I didn't hear whispers anymore. No dreams, no vanishing objects. I even started going outside again. I took a job working night shift maintenance at a rundown highway motel. I chose it because there were no guests most nights, no cameras, and no glass larger than a microwave door. It felt like a good place to be forgotten. For a few weeks, things were not normal, but quiet. That dangerous kind of quiet where you start hoping, where you start forgetting what made you leave in the first place. But she never forgets. Not ever. I found the first message on a towel. I was folding laundry at the back of the office, nothing special. The towel was beige plain. But across the corner, written in dirt, not blood, not ink, just damp, crumbly dirt, was a word. Watch. Just that. No signature. No follow-up. Just 5 letters and the deep, frozen feeling in my chest that someone had left it for me. Specifically. I tried to laugh it off, even convinced myself a guest had written it, or it was part of a brand name worn away with time. But deep down, I knew better. I tossed the towel, burned it behind the dumpsters. I stopped doing laundry. After that, I started wearing the same clothes every day, just so I wouldn't risk finding another message waiting for me in the folds. Next came the voicemail. My phone hadn't worked in months, not since the last update bricked it completely. No service, no apps, no sound. But one morning, it was glowing. 1 missed call. Unknown number. 1 voicemail. I pressed play. Silence. Then the sound of dirt being shoveled. Not fast, just steady. Rhythmic. The scrape of a spade. The thump of soil. And under it, barely audible, a voice humming. Not a melody. Not a lullaby. Just a slow, circular tune with no real beginning or end. The kind of sound someone makes when they've been doing the same thing for years, long after words have lost their meaning. I deleted the message, smashed the phone, swore I wouldn't get another. But a week later, a new one appeared on my nightstand. I hadn't bought it. I hadn't even left the room. But there it was, fully charged. No apps. Just a black screen with white text that read, "Turn around." I didn't, not that night. I stared at the screen until the battery died. When I finally worked up the nerve to look over my shoulder, there was nothing there. But the next morning, the notebook was back. The one I lost in the hollow lot. The one I swore I dropped during the chase. It was sitting on the motel desk, open to a new page. The handwriting wasn't mine, and the paper smelled like smoke and lavender. The words were simple. Thursday never ends. I should have burned it again. I should have thrown it into a lake or torn out the pages or done something. But I didn't. I kept it. Part of me thinks it's the only thing still tying me to what's real. The last object from my life before the unraveling. Or maybe I'm just afraid that if I let it go, I'll lose myself completely. I started seeing her in my coworkers' movements. A tilt of the head that mimicked Nell's. A phrase I only remember my dad saying, now echoed by the janitor. One guest, an old man with a limp, whistled the tune from the voicemail while passing me in the hallway. And worst of all, I think I saw my reflection wave at me the other day. Not just move oddly wave. A short, slow gesture like it was saying, goodbye or hello. I'm not sure which would be worse. That's when I knew the mourner never wanted to kill us. She wanted us to become her. Slowly, softly, in tiny movements and missing details. Until there's nothing left to call me anymore. Just the role, just the rhythm, just the ritual. Thursday, Thursday, forever. I don't think she ever stopped. I think I'm just a page in the next version of the story. And someday, someone else will find this motel, or this notebook. Or maybe they'll inherit the job from someone who never explained what really happened on their Thursday watch. And it'll begin again. The mourner will come. They'll think she's just a woman in black. They'll make the offerings. They'll hold still. They'll learn the rules. And they'll believe, for a while, that they're safe. That she can be contained. But she isn't the thing we watch. She's the thing that watches us watching. And the moment we look away, even for a second, that's when the real face slips through. I still light a lantern every Thursday. I don't sit on a bench. I don't wait for the veil. I just light it and leave it burning in the window, the same way we used to, because I know she's still out there. Or maybe in here. Or maybe the difference between those two doesn't exist anymore. Either way, the mourner in black is real. And if you've seen her, if you felt her close you, already know what comes next. I never planned on working in a cemetery. If you'd told me a year ago that I'd be mowing lawns around headstones and clearing out overgrown crypts for $12 an hour, I would have laughed in your face. But when rent was 3 weeks past due, my bank account was hovering just above zero, and I was down to my last can of beans and a bag of stale rice. It suddenly didn't sound so bad. I had dropped out of college to take care of my mom during her second round of chemo, and after she passed, all the safety nets just vanished. There was no savings left, no help from extended family, and my only friend with a couch had moved 2 states over. That's when I saw the flyer pinned to a corkboard outside. A gas station. Live-in groundskeeper needed. Krausfield Cemetery. Room provided. Immediate start. It felt like a sign, and maybe it was, but not the kind I should have followed. The ad didn't list a number. Just an address and an instruction to inquire in person. I figured the worst they could do was turn me away, so the next morning I grabbed my worn-out backpack, filled it with a change of clothes, my mom's old thermos, and a copy of Pet Sematary I'd been rereading, then headed out to find the place. Krausfield was about 30 minutes outside of town, tucked between a retired train line and a patch of woods that always smelled like mildew and rust. There was no real entrance, just a crooked metal gate hanging from one hinge and a narrow gravel path that disappeared into a curtain of willow trees. The air got colder the moment I stepped through. Not crisp cold, like the kind that sinks under your skin and makes your breath come out in fog even when the sun's overhead. I should have known then. Should have trusted that instinct that told me to turn around and walk back the way I came. But hunger makes you brave. Or maybe just reckless. I found the caretaker's cottage at the far end of the cemetery. It was small but solid stone walls, moss-covered roof, and a crooked chimney that looked like it had survived more winters than I had birthdays. The door was already open. No one answered when I knocked, so I stepped inside. The smell hit me. First, not death or rot like you'd expect, but old books and lavender. Clean, but in that unsettling, stale way. A man in a brown corduroy jacket appeared from the back room without a sound. His name was Mr. Hemsworth. He introduced himself as the current groundskeeper, well, technically the supervisor. He looked me up and down, asked 3 questions. You afraid of hard work? You afraid of ghosts? And, can you start tonight? I said no, and yes. That was all it took. He handed me a set of keys, pointed me to the shed where tools were stored, and told me not to go near the willow tree at the center of the cemetery after sundown. Things get ... talkative out there, he said. Then he left. Just like that. No paperwork. No warnings beyond that one weird comment. I should have asked more questions. The first day was mostly clearing brush and checking fences. The grounds were huge, far bigger than I expected. Rows and rows of headstones stretching beyond view, some so old the names had worn off entirely. There were newer graves too, with fresh flowers and solar lights blinking gently in the grass. I found a map tucked inside the shed, hand-drawn and marked with small notes. Sinkhole, avoid, crypt number 3 unstable, and circled in thick black ink. Willow. That word again. Always in caps. I wasn't sure what made that tree so special, but it stood out, even among the rest of the oddities. It grew right in the middle of a sunken patch of lawn, its roots so thick and knotted, they looked like they were strangling the graves around it. A rusty iron fence half encircled the trunk, like someone tried to build a barrier and gave up halfway through. During the day, it just looked old, overgrown, but there was something about the way the branches hung low, brushing the headstones like fingers across a keyboard, that made my stomach twist every time I looked in its direction. I'll skip the boring stuff, the tool inventory, the weed whacking, the 8-year-old lawnmower that needed coaxing and curses to even start. What matters is that by my 3rd night, I stopped sleeping in the cottage. Not because it was uncomfortable, but because I kept hearing noises beneath the floor, scraping sounds, like claws or fingernails tracing the wood. Once, I woke to the sound of the front door swinging open, even though I'd locked it. But there was never anyone there, nothing missing, nothing moved. Just that smell, lavender and soil, thicker than before. So I started dozing during the day and patrolling the cemetery at night. I figured if anything weird was happening, I'd rather meet it on the open field than in a locked room. And for a little while, that strategy worked. Until I stopped being alone out there, the voices began on the 7th night. At first I thought it was wind. The cemetery sat in a natural bowl, and the willow in the middle caught every breeze like a net. But then I noticed the pattern. The whispers weren't random, they were names. Spoken low and drawn out. Sometimes just a syllable at a time. Sometimes whispered right into my ear, even though I was 30 feet from the tree. Once it said my mother's name. Twice. And not like someone guessing. It sounded like her. Her exact cadence. The same warmth she used when waking me up for school. It froze me where I stood. I wanted to run, but my legs didn't listen. I stared at the willow, the way its trunk seemed to swell with every breath I took, and I knew something underneath it was listening. and calling, I brought it up to Hemsworth the next morning. He just looked tired. Told me everyone hears it eventually, and the worst thing you can do is talk back. It's not just wind, is it? I asked. He nodded. Nope, wind doesn't speak in full sentences. He took a sip from his dented thermos and added, if you start hearing digging, leave immediately. Doesn't matter what time it is. That made my stomach drop. Digging? I asked. Like shovels? He shook his head. No, digging like something trying to get out. And then he walked off like he just told me to watch for ants near the flower beds. No explanation, no warning. Just another cryptic rule to file away with the rest. Looking back though, I should have listened more closely. I thought I had time. I thought I could handle the whispers and weird noises, chalk it all up to lack of sleep and a head full of grief. But the cemetery doesn't care about your reasons. It only cares whether or not you listen. And I did. That night, I listened. I stood under the willow when I should have stayed far away. And when the whispers got louder, I didn't walk. I answered, just one word, just once, but that was enough. That's when it hit me. I hadn't been the one watching the cemetery. It had been watching me. From the moment I walked in through that crooked gate, the soil beneath the willow had been waiting for me to stop running long enough to hear what lay just beneath the roots after that first real whisper under the willow. I started keeping a notebook. Just a beat-up composition pad I found in a drawer at the caretaker's cottage, but it helped me feel like I had some control. I treated it like a log. Time of day, weather conditions, what the voices said, what I felt. The more I wrote, the more I noticed patterns. The whispers always came in waves, 3 nights of silence, followed by 2 or 3 nights of low-level activity. Then a spike. Always around the full moon, always from the same direction, the base of the willow near. The leaning headstone with no name on it. One night, I heard the voices echo twice, once under the tree, and again by the far fence, like they were trying to triangulate me. I circled it on the map from the shed. Something about that symmetry bothered me. It felt like they were planning something, or rehearsing. I started marking graves, which sounds weird unless you've walked among hundreds every night with no real point of reference. Most of them blurred together, John's and Mary's and Margaret's lost to time. But I carved a small X into the back of every 3rd stone with my pocket knife. That way, if anything ever moved, I'd know. It was an old trick my mom taught me when we used to go hiking. Always know what the world looks like before it changes, she'd say. I never thought I'd be applying it to graves. Within a week, 3 of the X's had vanished, not weathered off, not covered in moss, just gone, like the stones had been replaced or flipped. When I told Hemsworth, he didn't look surprised. He just nodded, pulled a flask from his coat, took a swig, and said, "Some of them like to be left alone. If you mark the wrong one, they take it as an invitation." Then he turned and walked back inside like that wasn't the most horrifying thing I'd ever heard. I couldn't stop thinking about what he said. An invitation. That made it sound like there was some kind of awareness behind what I'd been hearing. Not just memories or echoes, but choice, intent, maybe even strategy. The whispering hadn't stopped, but now it seemed to adjust itself depending on what I was doing. If I was on the far edge of the cemetery, they'd call out names I didn't know. If I got closer to the willow, they used my name. One time they whispered it backward. That really freaked me out. The scariest part wasn't just hearing it was knowing that they were studying me, just like I'd been trying to study them. Like we were circling each other in the dark, waiting for the first one to flinch. I thought about quitting more than once. Packing up and leaving in the middle of the night, no notice. No explanation, just running. But every time I reached the gate, something pulled me back. I told myself it was the money or the free room or just my pride, but it wasn't that. It was the feeling that I'd already been marked somehow, that even if I left, the voices would follow, that they'd find me again in the rustle of trees or the silence between streetlights. So I stayed. But I started sleeping with the lantern on and my boots by the door. And I started carrying a small trowel in my coat pocket, just in case I needed to dig something up or dig myself out. I don't know which one I feared more. On the 12th night, I saw something under the willow. Not just shadows or movement, something. A figure, thin, almost frail, swaying with the branches like it had been growing there the whole time. A figure, thin, almost frail, swaying with the branches like it had been growing there the whole time. I stood 50 feet away, too scared to move forward, too proud to run. I whispered, "Who are you?" The figure didn't answer, but the voices around me stopped, all at once. Like a switch had been flipped. I've never felt silence so loud. I swear I could hear my own blood. The figure tilted its head, then slowly faded into the tree trunk like smoke being pulled back into a chimney. And when it was gone, the whispers started again, but softer this time, more like breathing. I dropped my flashlight and backed away until I hit the fence line. That night, I didn't go back to the cottage. I stayed in the tool shed. With the lantern lit and the door barred shut with a shovel wedged into the frame, Hemsworth stopped showing up after that. No explanation, no note. His thermos was still on the porch, half full of whatever herbal sludge he always drank, and his coat still hung on the hook, but the man himself was just gone. I waited 3 days, checked the road, even walked a mile. Down the tracks, nothing. It was like the cemetery swallowed him. And I started to worry that maybe this was how the job worked. Maybe there was always a groundskeeper, and that person was always someone who didn't ask too many questions. Someone the world wouldn't notice missing. I tried calling the number listed on the utility bill pinned to the wall of the cottage, but it rang once, then went straight to static. Not a voicemail, static. The same pitch and rhythm as the whispers, just layered and flattened out like it had been playing so long it forgot it was ever a voice in the first place. I kept working, mowing, trimming, marking graves. I didn't know what else to do, but I started carrying salt packets in my pockets. I spread them in circles whenever I needed to stop and rest. I avoided the willow entirely, but the cemetery had other plans. Paths started changing. Graves that used to be on the far end now showed up near the center. One night I took a photo with my old Polaroid just to mark the layout. When I checked the picture, the willow was missing. Not out of frame, gone. Just an empty clearing where it should have been. But when I turned around, it was still there, swaying gently, its roots twitching like fingers in the dirt. That's when I realized the tree wasn't a marker or a landmark. It was a door, and something on the other side was trying to open it. The worst moment came the day I found the second notebook. It was hidden under the floorboards in the caretaker's cottage, wrapped in wax paper and twine. I almost didn't open it. Part of me knew what it was before I ever touched it. Not mine. Not Hemsworth's. Someone else's. Someone before. The writing was jagged, frantic. Page after page of the same phrases. Don't listen. Don't answer. They lie in your voice. And then, near the end, the tree drinks the ones who stay too long. The last page had only a single word written over and over. Again, in darker and darker ink until it tore through the paper. Deep. That night, the whispers changed. They no longer waited for dark. They started in broad daylight, loud and impatient, and when I walked past the willow that morning, the dirt was damp and breathing. It's strange calling it a first day when you've already been somewhere for 2 weeks, but that's how it felt the morning after the second notebook. Like everything before had just been orientation scratching the surface, learning the layout. But when I opened my eyes that morning, I could tell something had shifted. The light outside was wrong. Not dim or cloudy, just dot off, like it was, filtering through water. Everything had a greenish tint, and the wind didn't sound like wind anymore. It sounded like distant breathing. Not human, not mechanical. Just something deep and slow and steady, like the land itself was alive and listening. I looked out the window and saw that the willow tree had moved. I'm not talking about leaning or shifting with the wind. It was literally standing 15 feet closer to the cottage. The roots had broken the stone path. One of them had curled around the porch post like a hand gripping the edge of a table. And I realized with full certainty I was no longer living next to the cemetery. I was living inside it. The cottage no longer felt safe. The floorboards creaked in patterns. The closet door refused to stay closed, and the mirror in the bathroom, an old, rust-speckled thing I had avoided since night 3, was no longer reflecting the right image. It showed me, sure, but always a beat late, like it had to catch up, and sometimes it showed things that weren't there. A second shadow moving behind me. A figure just out of focus, leaning behind the curtain. Once, when I leaned in close, the reflection smiled before I did. After that, I covered the mirror with an old bedsheet and duct tape and started shaving by feel. There are some things you just don't test more than once, no matter how curious you are. I started wearing my boots to bed and keeping a flashlight under my pillow. I stopped using the stove after I found earthworms in the burners one morning, alive, writhing, coated in something thick and gray like ash. I lived on dry cereal and bottled water. I stopped writing in my notebook because I was starting to notice entries I didn't remember making. They were in my handwriting, but full of things I'd never say, phrases like, "She waits beneath the root and let her in." The ink smelled like mold. Some pages were damp even when the room was dry. I burned 2 of them in the fireplace and listened as the flames hissed like they were swallowing words. The smoke smelled sweet, familiar. I think it was the same lavender scent from the voices. That day, I decided I'd make one last loop of the property before packing my things. If the tree had moved once, maybe it had moved again. Maybe the whole place was shifting beneath my feet. So I walked the perimeter with my map and marked down anything new. A row of stones had sunken into the grass behind the shed. One crypt that had been sealed last week was now wide open, though the door showed no signs of tampering. The willow, despite clearly shifting closer to my cottage, still appeared in the center of the cemetery if I walked far enough back and turned around. That's when it hit me. The layout was looping, like a game map glitching in real time. I could walk in a straight line for 20 minutes and end up back where I started. The trees never lined up quite the same way twice, and no matter where I went, I could always hear the whispering now, even in daylight. It wasn't hiding anymore. Around noon, I spotted something new. A pile of stones stacked in a spiral near the base of the willow. They hadn't been there yesterday, or ever, as far as I knew. The stones were smooth and flat, stacked carefully, deliberately, like someone or something was building a cairn. There was a single object resting at the top, a small ceramic figure, hand-painted, no more than 3 inches tall. It looked like a man with a lantern. The detail was crude, but the resemblance was unmistakable. It was Hemsworth. The brown jacket, the boots, even the silver thermos slung over his shoulder. I stared at it for a long time before backing away. When I turned to leave, I noticed the headstones surrounding the tree were different. Their names had changed. My mother's was among them now. So was mine. I ran. Not in panic, exactly. Just with the cold certainty that if I didn't leave the willow behind me quickly, I wouldn't leave it at all. The ground felt soft underfoot, too soft, like it was remembering how to breathe. I don't know how else to explain it. And the whispers, no longer faint or scattered, they were chanting. Not in English, not in anything I recognized. Just rhythm and tone and something deeper than language. Something that made my bones vibrate like tuning forks. I didn't stop running until I reached the gate, and even then, I didn't trust it. The gate looked the same, but the world beyond it didn't. The air was thicker. The trees on the other side were taller than I remembered. The gravel underfoot crunched too loud, like it was echoing under the soil. I stood there for nearly an hour, trying to decide if I should step through or just curl up and wait for morning. But I didn't have to decide. The tree did it for me. When I turned to look back, the willow was closer again. Not by a lot, maybe. 5 feet, but enough that it now sat directly between me and the cottage, blocking the path, watching, waiting. Its roots had cracked a nearby headstone, split it clean down the middle like an open mouth. I didn't go back to the cottage that night. I slept in the shed with the map and the lantern lit. I woke up to the sound of something knocking beneath the floor. 3 short taps, a pause, then one long scrape, like fingernails dragging across plywood. I held my breath, didn't move. The knocks didn't repeat, but when I finally worked up the nerve to lift the rug, I saw a crack in the wood and dirt pressing up from underneath. Fresh, damp, breathing dirt. That's when I knew. The tree wasn't just a door. It was a mouth. And the cemetery was trying to swallow me whole. It's hard to describe how quickly the cemetery turned on me. After that night, not like a haunted house with jump scares and flickering lights, no. This was slow, creeping, almost polite. The world just stopped working the way it should. My watch ticked backward for hours at a time, then froze completely. The sky above Krausfield no longer matched the weather in town. I checked my phone one morning and saw the forecast calling for rain, but overhead it was blindingly sunny until I stepped beneath the willow's shadow, where it was suddenly cold enough to see my breath. I kept trying to take photos of the tree, but they never came out right. Sometimes the tree was missing. Sometimes it was there in double. And once, just once, the picture showed a figure hanging from one of the branches. There was no rope. Number. Body. Just the shape of something dangling, impossibly still, with empty holes where its eyes should have been. I started finding things buried in the dirt that didn't belong. A set of old house keys with no markings. A child's sock perfectly clean despite being pulled from 6 inches underground. A wristwatch that looked just like mine, but the hands pointed in opposite directions. Most disturbing was the Polaroid photo folded beneath a cracked slab near the west fence. It showed the willow tree, but behind it, just barely visible through the branches, was me, standing still, staring forward. Same jacket, same boots, only I had no face in the photo. Just a white blur where it should have been. I don't remember posing for that photo. I don't remember anyone ever taking it. When I looked on the back, written in smudged ink, were the words, "Don't let them name you." That phrase stuck in my head like a song lyric. It made no sense, but it felt important. The whispers weren't content to stay near the willow anymore. They started following me. I'd hear them in the shed, in the bathroom, even in my dreams. Always low at first, curling up from the floor, like steam, then rising in pitch until they sounded like a crowd chanting behind a thick wall. Some nights they mimicked voices I recognized. My mother, Hemsworth, even myself, repeating phrases I'd said days earlier. It wasn't just haunting, it was imitation. Like the cemetery was learning how to be me. One night, I heard someone knock on the cottage door. 3 sharp taps. Then my own voice called out from the other side, cheerful and relaxed. "You forgot your keys." I didn't move. I just stared at the door and waited for the voice to fade. It never did. It stood outside humming that strange circular melody until dawn. I tried to track the movement of the tree again, but it was pointless. The layout of the graves had changed. Markers that once sat in neat rows now twisted like a spiral, always turning inward toward the center. Some stones had no names, just carvings of mouths or open hands. The ones that did have names now included mine 6 times, 6 different dates. Some in the past, some yet to come, and each one was paired with a different epitaph. He listened too long. He answered when he shouldn't. He stepped where she told him to. I took charcoal rubbings of the stones, thinking I could show someone, maybe prove I wasn't losing it. But by the time I returned to the cottage, the paper had rotted in my hands. Black mold spread across it like veins. The message had been recorded, but not for me to keep. I tried leaving again. Packed everything I had, what little was left, and marched straight for the gate in broad daylight. I reached it in less than 10 minutes, or at least I thought I had. When I pushed the gate open and stepped through, I was back at the willow. Not the entrance, not even near the edge. Standing dead center in the circle of sunken graves with the branches whispering above my head. I dropped my bag and screamed. Not out of fear, but rage. Whatever game this place was playing, I was done. I hurled the map into the roots, stomped across the nearest headstone, and shouted, "What do you want?" That's when the ground beneath me sighed, yes. Sighed, and a small crack opened underfoot, just wide enough to show a sliver of something. Glowing. It wasn't fire, or light, or even color. Just a presence. I backed away slowly and didn't speak the rest of the day. Not out loud. The next morning, the tree had a gift for me. Sitting at the base, wrapped in burlap and tied with string, was my old notebook, the first one I'd abandoned. I hadn't seen it in days. Its cover was stained now, waterlogged and warped, but the pages were clean, not blank clean, as in freshly rewritten. The handwriting was mine, but none of it was familiar. It recorded events I hadn't experienced yet. A drawing of a gravestone I didn't recognize. A name circled 3 times. Elsbeth. I didn't know anyone by that name. And yet, the next night, when I walked past crypt number 4, that name was freshly carved into a new marker out front. The dirt hadn't even settled. The date of death? Tomorrow's. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just trapped in the cemetery's layout. I was being written into it. Like a new entry. A new echo. I stopped marking time after that. My phone battery died and never recharged. My watch froze again and now showed all 12 numbers as 4. I don't know what day it is. I only know how long it's been since I've seen another person. 12 days, or maybe 30. Hemsworth never returned. No cars passed on the road beyond the trees. No birds, no planes. The outside world had receded like a tide, leaving me stranded in the mud. The whispers no longer waited for nightfall. They spoke in chorus now, sometimes layered, sometimes laughing. One voice told me to dig beneath the willow. Another begged me not to. A third just kept repeating the same phrase, "Say your name and be whole. Say your name and belong." That's when I understood the warning from the photo. If I answered, if I gave them that last piece of myself, they'd use it. Not to haunt me, to replace me, and yet I almost did it. One morning, when the wind stopped and the light felt like honey, I stood beneath the willow and whispered my name. Soft, half-hearted, but I said it. The tree rustled gently. A single root uncoiled from the soil and reached toward me like a finger. That moment stretched forever. My skin buzzed. My ears filled with white noise. And in that moment, I swear I felt my body blur at the edges, like I wasn't just me anymore. I was part of the place. Part of the whispering. Part of the story. But then the lantern I'd left back in the shed flickered to life. No one had touched it. There was no power left in the battery. But the flame rose anyway, and with it, something inside me snapped awake. I stepped back. The root retracted, and the ground beneath the tree sighed again. Not disappointed, not angry, just waiting. It was around what I think was the 32nd day when I lost the first thing that proved the cemetery could reach beyond suggestion. I woke up one morning and my boots were missing. They'd been right by the door as always, still caked in dried soil from the night before. It might sound small, but those boots were more than just gear. They were my last defense, thick leather, steel toe. The only thing between me and the shifting, wet ground I walked every night. I searched the entire cottage, then the shed, Then, the cemetery paths. Nothing. No footprints. No signs of someone breaking in. Just the faint smell of that lavender-soaked soil wafting under every doorframe. That's when I noticed the mud on the porch steps. My boots had walked away without me. I started keeping every possession close after that. My flashlight went under my pillow. My mother's thermos I carried in my jacket at all times. The key to the caretaker's shed stayed on a chain around my neck. But even that didn't help. The next item to vanish was the notebook, the rewritten one I'd found near the willow. I'd hidden it inside a toolbox beneath a coil of rusted wire, under a false bottom I'd built myself. Still, one morning, it was gone. In its place was a single sheet of paper folded 4 times. On it was a charcoal drawing of a tree with dozens of mouths hidden its bark, some open, some stitched shut. Beneath it, written in small, almost delicate handwriting, "You're being remembered." It chilled me more than any threat could have. It wasn't saying I was being watched. It was saying I was being written in. Not recorded, etched. That same day, I heard the digging. At first, I thought it was just wind rattling a loose stone. But the rhythm was too sharp, too steady. Scoop, drag, tap, then again. Scoop, drag, tap. It wasn't far. It was coming from the base of the willow. I crept closer, keeping to the rows of gravestones, trying not to make a sound. When I reached the final line of stones before the clearing, I crouched and waited. The digging stopped. The wind stilled. Then something whispered my full name, not in my mother's voice, not in mine, just a new voice, soft and syrupy, like it had waited years just to taste those syllables. And that's when it happened. My jaw clenched without me meaning to, my eyes rolled back, and I felt myself say it back, my name, whispered to the tree, not from my lips, but through them. Like something else was speaking with my body, like my throat had become hollow just long enough to be used. I don't remember falling. One moment I was crouched, the next I was flat on my back, staring up at the sky through a canopy of shifting branches. Not willow branches' hands. Hundreds of pale, thin fingers reaching down through the tree limbs, brushing my face, searching for something. I tried to scream, but my voice was gone. Stolen, maybe. The whispers had stopped altogether. I could only hear my heartbeat, thudding like thunder in a deep, endless cave. Then the hands withdrew, the sky returned to normal, and I was alone. But my mouth tasted like soil and iron, and my left ear was ringing with a faint voice I couldn't quite understand. Something had touched me. Something had spoken using me. And now it had left a piece behind. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. The lantern wouldn't light anymore, no matter how many new batteries I tried. The flashlight dimmed to a weak glow. I started writing messages to myself on the walls with chalk. Don't listen. Don't respond. Don't sleep near the roots. I found the mirror in the bathroom uncovered again, even though I hadn't touched it. The sheet was folded on the counter like someone had gently unwrapped it. And when I looked inside, my reflection was smiling at me, not a big grin. Just a small, knowing smirk, like it was waiting for me to catch up to something it already knew. I threw a towel over it and never looked again. Looking back, though, that was the real first incident. Not the voices, not the missing items, But the moment the cemetery stopped being a setting and became a participant, it wasn't just reacting to me anymore. It was changing me. My memories blurred, days looped. I started losing track of how long I'd been outside or how many times I'd visited the willow. At one point, I dug a small hole near one of the older graves just to test if the soil was shifting. 2 days later, I passed that same grave and saw the hole filled back in with a single item resting on top, my mother's thermos. I hadn't dropped it. I still had it, but there it was. Another one, identical in every way, down to the dent on the left side. Only when I opened it, it wasn't coffee inside, it was soil. Damp, warm, and still breathing in that faint rhythmic pulse I'd come to fear. It was around then that I started hearing her voice again. Not just once or twice in a whisper, but in full sentences. Comforting ones. My mom used to say things like, "The world only asks what you're willing to give," and "Some things grow better in the dark." I thought those were just her sayings. Turns out, they were quotes. Reused phrases that the willow fed back to me. I'd hear them while walking past the crypts or sitting on the porch at night. And then one day, I heard her voice directly in my left ear, inside my ear. Like it came through the bone. She said, "You don't have to leave. It's safer in the soil." That's when I knew what they wanted. Not my fear. Not even my life. They wanted my place, my voice, my name. To bury the idea of me so they could walk around wearing it. I couldn't believe how fast it had all gone wrong. I should have known better. The signs were all there from the start. The scent, the strange job posting, the way Hemsworth never explained anything, the shifting layout. But I ignored it because I was broke and tired and desperate. I thought I could handle a few spooky trees and weird noises if it meant free rent and a fresh start. But this wasn't a haunted house. It was a living story, and I had read too far into it, and now it was reading me back. The soil remembered. The tree remembered. The cemetery wasn't full of the dead. It was full of the unfinished. People, half-claimed, half-written, still whispering their way into shape. And I was next. I could feel it every time I blinked. Something behind my eyes was waiting for me to fall asleep again, so it could finish what it started. The wind changed first. It no longer blew from one direction, but seemed to circle around me like a dog sniffing out weakness. I noticed it while standing near the shed one morning, trying to organize what little remained of my supplies. The leaves rustled in a perfect spiral, inward toward the willow. The wind carried no chill, just pressure, as if the air had weight. And I was suddenly standing at the bottom of a sea. I backed away, and it stopped. When I stepped forward again, the wind picked up, tighter now, spinning toward the base of the tree, like it was dragging something invisible through the grass. That was when I knew the whispers weren't asking anymore. They were pulling. Later that night, I woke to find dirt on my hands, not a little caked. My fingernails packed tight, palms smeared with damp soil. My boots, yes, the ones that had vanished, were back at the foot of the bed, now soaked in mud. I had no memory of putting them on, let alone going outside. But something had moved me. I found my notebook open to a page I didn't write. At the top, in thick charcoal, were the words, "The voice fits now, try it on." And below it, a crude drawing of my face, except the mouth was wide open, and inside were roots. The lines were frantic, overlapping like someone had scratched it while in a trance. I stared at that page for hours, trying to figure out if the drawing was meant to warn me or welcome me. I made one final attempt to send a message to the outside. I packed a small bag with the Polaroid, the notebook pages, the thermos, and my original job posting from the online forum. I left the cemetery at noon, broad daylight, map in hand. This time, I didn't walk toward the gate. I climbed the west fence and cut straight through the woods. Every step away from the willow felt like pushing against thick syrup, but I kept going. I reached the road after what felt like an hour. There was no traffic, no sound, not even birds. I walked another half-mile before I spotted something familiar. The willow tree, standing right where the road should have curved away. I dropped the bag and turned around. Same tree, same curve. I was back again, in the center of the cemetery. The bag of evidence now resting at the base of the tree like an offering I didn't remember placing. The roots moved while I watched. Not much, just a subtle twitch, a slight bulge. Enough to show me they were aware. They didn't hide anymore. The whispers grew louder, not around me, but inside me, echoing through my jaw, my teeth, my skull. They told me things I didn't want to hear, memories I'd buried deep, regrets, shame, failures. They brought them all up and spoke them aloud, not as cruelty, but as comfort. Like they were saying, "It's okay, we know you. We remember you. You belong here." That's when the ground shifted again, and a fresh grave appeared where the soil had been flat moments earlier. A simple wooden plank marked it. No name, just the words, "Now you know." I don't remember kneeling. One moment I was standing, the next I was down on the grass, hand on the grave, the dirt warm beneath my palm like it had a heartbeat. The whispers were silent. The tree stood still. Everything held its breath as if waiting for me to say yes. For a terrifying second, I thought I might. I thought maybe letting go would be easier. Just surrendering to the story, becoming another voice in the soil, another echo behind the roots. But then the ground beneath my hand pulled. Not sank. Pulled. A force yanked my arm downward as if a hand had grabbed it from beneath. I screamed and kicked back, scrambling away as the dirt split open wider, exposing more of that awful glowing soil. My sleeve was torn, my watch ripped clean off. I never saw it again. That was the first time the tree tried to take me whole. The next 2 days were a blur of hiding. I slept in the shed, behind the mower, wrapped in a tarp to stay warm. I ate nothing, drank only bottled water, careful to sniff it first in case it had been tampered with. I kept the lantern lit as long as the battery would allow, even when it dimmed to an orange flicker. I tried not to blink. Every time I did, I saw the roots curling through my vision like veins across glass. I could feel the cemetery inside my body now. My limbs ached. My spine popped. My ears constantly rang. I knew I was being reshaped, rebuilt into something else. Not to scare people, but to fit. Like a puzzle piece being sanded down until it clicked into place under the willow's shadow. The worst moment came when I heard Hemsworth again. Or something wearing him. His voice came from the porch, calm, slow, just like before. "You've done well," it said. "She sees you now." I peeked out the shed window and saw his shape, same coat, same posture, but the face was wrong. Too smooth, no wrinkles, no expression. Like it had been made from memory but left unfinished. He or it walked past the tool shed without knocking. It didn't even look at me. Just wandered off into the graves and disappeared behind a row of trees that weren't there the day before. That night, I carved my name into the concrete floor of the shed, not as a cry for help, as a reminder that I had been someone, that I was real. Even if no one ever found me, the final sign came in the form of another gift. A fresh lantern. Brand new, polished brass, with a ribbon tied around the handle. No note, no tag. Just sitting at the center of the graveyard, waiting. I didn't touch it. Not right away. But the whispers told me what it meant. That was the job now. I was no longer the groundskeeper. I was the guide. The one who walks with the light and leads others through the path. Just like Hemsworth did. Just like whoever came before him. The tree doesn't steal people. It recruits. It waits until you've broken down, then hands you a new role to play. One you can't refuse without leaving a part of yourself behind. I should have walked away weeks ago, but now I couldn't even find the path. And that lantern kept flickering at the corner of my vision, even when I wasn't looking at it. I didn't plan my escape so much as I reached a point where staying became impossible. The air had grown too heavy. Every breath felt like drawing. In wet ash, the whispering was no longer confined to night. It buzzed constantly, even through sleep. I was dreaming in words I didn't understand, waking up with sentences in my throat that didn't belong to me. I stopped writing because I couldn't trust my own hands. I found drawings in the margins of my old notebook's faces with open mouths, trees with ribs, hands clutching lanterns, and none of them matched my style. They were mine, but they weren't from me. That's when I made the choice. Not because I believed I could leave, but because if I stayed one more day, I'd become part of the soil in a way that couldn't be undone. I waited for the moment the cemetery seemed least awake, if that makes sense. Just before dawn, when the fog hadn't fully lifted and the wind had stopped circling the willow. I didn't take any bags. I didn't say goodbye. I just started. Walking east, past the broken fence where the ivy had eaten through the iron. I passed the cracked crypt where I once saw the shadows moving behind the stone. The headstones with my name on them, now smudged and unreadable. I passed the spot where I found my mother's thermos buried, where I saw my reflection smile without me, and I kept walking. I didn't look back, not even once. That was the rule, the one my gut screamed at me. If you turn around, it pulls. You faster, the trees thinned, the ground hardened. Eventually, I reached the road, the real one. I could tell because I saw power lines overhead and the faint sound of a car. Radio down the hill. Civilization. Life. People. I collapsed just past the ditch, and someone, maybe a passing driver, maybe a neighbor, called for help. The rest is a blur of hospitals, IVS, and cops asking me questions I didn't want to answer. I gave them the sanitized version. I was lost in the woods. Got disoriented, dehydrated, spent too long alone, and started hearing things. They bought it. Or maybe they didn't care. Either way, they didn't press. No one ever mentioned the cemetery. No one ever said the name Krausfield. It was like the place didn't exist anymore. Or like no one remembered it but me. I moved back in with my cousin in a nearby town. He doesn't ask questions. Lets me stay in the guest room and keeps the lights on at night without comment. I haven't told him what really happened, just that I had a breakdown and needed space. I got a job shelving books at a used bookstore and haven't been back online since. I don't look at maps. I don't go for walks. I don't answer numbers. I don't recognize. For a while, things felt normal. Quiet, even. But the soil in this town smells the same after it rains sweet, a little floral, a hint of rot. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear footsteps on gravel that no one else seems to hear. 2 weeks ago, I checked my mailbox and found something I didn't expect. A small package wrapped in brown paper and twine with no return address. Inside was a photo, an old Polaroid of the willow tree. Same as before. But this time, there was no version of me standing behind it. There were 5, all identical. All with blurred out faces. And written on the back, in that same faint charcoal, "The job is still open." I burned it immediately, or at least I tried. The photo wouldn't catch. It blackened at the edges, but the image remained, like it was printed on memory, not paper. I buried it behind the apartment and didn't tell anyone. But the next morning, there was a lantern sitting outside my window, polished, shining, brand new. I haven't touched it. I moved it into the hallway and covered it with a blanket. I know it's a trap, I know that. But some nights I see a faint glow coming from under the cloth, and I can't help but wonder if the tree is still whispering, just from farther away. I hear things in the pipes now, voices in the hum of the fridge. Sometimes the walls breathe, and I catch my own reflection watching me with that same knowing look. My name doesn't sound right in my mouth anymore. Like it doesn't quite fit the way it used to. Like it's been stretched, rewritten, molded into a shape that better suits what they want me to become. The worst part? I think I'm starting to understand what they were saying. The whispers, the drawings, even the grave with "now you know." They weren't threatening me. They were preparing me, training me to take over something that needs a caretaker, a guide, a voice. I used to think they wanted to replace me. Now I think they wanted me to grow into something else, something shaped by the roots, someone willing to keep the tree fed. I haven't gone back. I won't, but I still feel the ground pulling sometimes, and when I wake up, there's always dirt under my fingernails, even if I fell asleep with gloves on. And last night, I heard it again, the voice, from under the floor this time. Not outside, not in my head. It came from the pipes, maybe the drain soft and low. It said, "She's coming." Just that, then silence. I don't know who she is. Maybe the voice from the tree. Maybe the one inside the tree. Maybe what feeds it. All I know is that I've started dreaming in roots again. That I hear laughter in the dark corners of the bookstore. And that today, when I opened the fridge, I found a piece of paper stuck to the milk carton, written in my handwriting. Words I don't remember writing. It said, "Say your name and belong." And I can't lie, I almost said it out loud.